Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was raised by Orochimaru and fell in love with his most loyal follower? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Serpent's Embrace. The wind over the land of rice fields carried the scent of rain and damp earth, a familiar perfume that clung to Naruto's black and gray robes. He stood on the precipice of a deep gorge, the roar of the river below a steady, churning thunder. Below, nestled in the crevice like a viper in the rocks, was the hidden village of Ishigakure. It was a place of little note, a minor village with delusions of grandeur, and, more importantly, the current resting place of the Dragon's Eye, a scroll of immense value to his father. Are you going to stare at it all day, or are we going to get this over with? Naruto didn't turn. He knew that voice, the sharp, impatient cadence that always seemed to cut through the air. Yuya. He could picture her without looking. The wild pink hair, the defiant set of her jaw. The flute slung across her back that was as much a weapon as any blade. Patience, Yuya, he said, his own voice a low, calm counterpoint to her fire. A moment's observation can prevent an hour of bloodshed. Some of us enjoy the bloodshed, a deeper, more guttural voice rumbled from his other side. Kitamura, with his 6 arms and unsettling grin, was already speaking, a web of golden chakra between his fingers, eager for the hunt. Naruto finally turned, his violet eyes, a legacy of his father's teachings and his own unique chakra, sweeping over his team. They were the Sound Four, or what was left of them, a mismatched collection of Orochimaru's most powerful and loyal pawns. And then there was him. Naruto Uzumaki, the serpent's heir, the vessel of the 9-tailed fox. And the one who would inherit it all. Or so he had been promised. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Kitamura, you're on overwatch. From the west cliff. Give us a signal if their patrol patterns change. Jirobo. He glanced at the hulking, stoic man, you're our exit strategy. If this goes south, I want a clear path back through the north wall. Understood. Jirobo grunted in affirmation, his massive frame shifting as he prepared to move. Kitamura simply cackled and leapt away, his movements spider-like and unnervingly silent. That left Yuya. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. And what about me, Lord Naruto? Am I to play you a lullaby while you work? The sarcasm was thick, a familiar weapon she wielded with expert precision. He was Lord Naruto. When she was feeling particularly rebellious, he met her gaze, a faint smile playing on his lips. You're with me. I need your ears. The scroll is kept in the Elders' Council chambers. According to the intel, it's protected by a series of sound-based genjutsu seals. Your specialty, I believe. For a moment, she seemed taken aback, the biting retort dying on her lips. He had acknowledged her skill, her importance to the mission. It was a small thing, but with Yuya, small things mattered. She gave a curt nod, her expression unreadable. Fine, but keep up. I don't intend to drag you out of there. I would expect nothing less. He replied, his smile widening slightly. Together, they descended into the gorge, moving with a silent, practiced grace. The air grew thick with the spray of the river, the scent of wet stone and moss. Naruto's senses were alive, his chakra reaching out, feeling the subtle shifts in the environment. He could feel the life within the village, the ebb and flow of its people, the stationed guards. The children playing in the narrow streets. It was a tapestry of energy, and he was learning to read its threads. They slipped through the village's outer defenses with contemptuous ease, a testament to Orochimaru's training. They were ghosts, shadows in the mist-filled alleys. The buildings of Ishigakure were carved from the gorge itself, a maze of stone and winding staircases. It was a fortress, but even fortresses had cracks. As they neared the central spire, where the Elders' Council resided, Yuya held up a hand, her head cocked. Wait. Naruto froze, melting back into the shadow of an overhanging rock. He watched her, the way she closed her eyes, her focus absolute. It was a rare moment of stillness for her, a glimpse of the artist behind the warrior. 3 guards, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. 2 in the corridor, one directly in front of the chamber door. And something else, A low hum. The seals are active. Can you break them? He asked. She opened her eyes. A flicker of pride in their depths. I can rewrite them into a nursery rhyme if you give me enough time. You have 5 minutes, he said. I'll handle the guards. Before she could object, he was gone. A blur of motion. He moved not with the brute force of Jirobo or the acrobatic flair of Kitamura, but with a fluid, serpentine grace. He was a predator, and this was his hunting ground. The 2 guards in the corridor never saw him coming. A flicker of movement in their peripheral vision, a whisper of displaced air, and then a sharp, precise strike to the back of the neck. They crumpled without a sound, their lives extinguished before they could even register the threat. The 3rd guard, the one at the door, was more alert. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of old battles and long watches. He sensed something was wrong, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. Naruto emerged from the shadows, not as an attacker, but as a presence. He stood there, his violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You should have retired, he said, his voice calm, almost sympathetic. The guard's eyes widened in fear, but he was a veteran. He drew his sword, its ring echoing in the stone corridor. You will not defile this sacred place. Naruto sighed. It was already defiled when you decided to steal from my father. He moved then, not with a weapon, but with his hands. He wove a series of signs, his fingers a blur. Wind style. Serpent's kiss. A small, almost invisible tendril of wind shot forward, silent and deadly. It was a technique of his own design. A fusion of his wind affinity and the snake-based jutsu Orochimaru had taught him. The tendril of wind was shaped like a striking viper, and it moved with the same lethal precision. The guard tried to block, to dodge. But the attack was too fast, too subtle. The wind serpent struck him in the chest, not with the force of a gale, but with the sharp, piercing impact of a fang. He gasped, his sword clattering to the floor. There was no visible wound, but the air had been forced from his lungs, his heart shocked into submission. He collapsed, his life ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. Chiyuya emerged from the side passage, her flute already in her hand. She glanced at the fallen guards, a flicker of something, respect, in her eyes. Show off, she muttered, but there was no heat in it. She knelt by the chamber door, her fingers tracing the intricate seals carved into the stone. Amateurs, she scoffed. They're layered, but they're not harmonized. It's like a symphony played by a deaf orchestra. Her flute came to her lips, and she began to play. It was not a melody of war or seduction, but a complex, almost mathematical series of notes. It was a language, a code that spoke to the very essence of the seals. Naruto watched, fascinated as always by her unique brand of genius. He could feel the chakra in the seals vibrating, resonating with her music, a chaotic hum slowly resolving into a steady, controlled rhythm. One by one, the seals glowed and then faded, the intricate patterns of light winking out of existence. With a final, triumphant note from Chiyuya's flute, the heavy stone door clicked open. Done, she said, a smirk of satisfaction on her face. Try not to trip over anything important. The chamber was opulent, filled with gaudy decorations and piles of scrolls. But in the center, on a raised pedestal, was a single, ornate scroll case. The dragon's eye. Naruto moved towards it, his senses on high alert. It was too easy. Something was wrong. As his fingers brushed against the scroll case, the room was plunged into darkness. The stone door slammed shut, and the air grew heavy, thick with killing intent. From the shadows, a voice emerged, cold and ancient. You have a great deal of nerve, child of the serpent, to steal from the dragon's den. Naruto's eyes adjusted to the darkness, his chakra flaring to life. He could see the silhouettes now, 4 of them, surrounding him and Chiyuya. They were the elders of Ishigakure, their chakra signatures heavy and powerful. We are not thieves, Naruto said, his voice calm despite the ambush. He picked up the scroll case, his grip firm. We are simply taking back what was stolen. The lead elder, a man with a long, white beard and eyes that seemed to see through to the soul, chuckled. Possession is the law of the strong. A lesson your father knows well. You should have learned it by now. Naruto smiled, a dangerous, predatory smile that was all Orochimaru. Oh, I have. That's why I'm here. The battle was sudden and brutal. The elders were masters of earth-style jutsu, the very stone of the chamber rising to their command. Spikes erupted from the floor, walls of rock slammed together, and giant stone fists sought to crush them. Naruto moved like a phantom, a whirlwind of motion and deadly grace. He flowed around their attacks, his movements unpredictable, his strikes precise. He was a dervish of black and gray, his short blonde hair a flash of gold in the gloom. Chiyuya was his perfect partner. She stood her ground, her flute a blur of motion as she played a new, terrifying melody. It was a song of madness, of chaos, a dissonant chord that attacked the minds of their enemies. The elders clutched their heads, their powerful earth jutsu faltering as their senses were overwhelmed by her sonic assault. Wind style. Great serpent breakthrough. Naruto roared, weaving a new set of signs. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and then exhaled a massive, spiraling tor. Rent of wind shaped like a gigantic serpent. It smashed through the elders' rock defenses, sending shards of stone flying like shrapnel. The lead elder, his concentration broken by Chiyuya's genjutsu, was too slow to react. The wind serpent slammed into him, and he was thrown against the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. The remaining 3 elders, seeing their leader fall, faltered. It was the opening Naruto needed. He formed a Rasengan in his palm, the spiraling sphere of chakra, a miniature storm of destructive power. It was a jutsu he had perfected in secret, a legacy of a past he barely remembered. Now twisted into a tool for his own purposes. He slammed the Rasengan into the chest of the nearest elder, the impact sending the man flying. The other 2, their will broken, turned to flee. But there was no escape. From the shadows, 2 golden webs shot out, ensnaring the fleeing elders. Kitamura, his 6 arms spread wide, hung from the ceiling like a demonic arachnid. Leaving so soon, he cackled. The party was just getting started. Naruto nodded his thanks to Kitamura, then turned to Chiyuya. Are you all right? She was breathing heavily, a trickle of blood from her nose. A side effect of pushing her sound genjutsu to its limits. I'm fine, she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Just a little noisy in my head. He reached out, his hand gently tilting her chin up. His thumb brushed away the blood. It was a simple, unconscious gesture, a moment of genuine concern that cut through their usual banter. Her eyes widened slightly, her breath catching in her throat. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a different kind of energy than the heat of battle. The moment was broken by a groan from the lead elder. He was stirring, pushing himself up from the rubble. Naruto's expression hardened. He walked over to the fallen elder, his shadow falling over the old man. You were right, Naruto said, his voice cold. Possession is the law of the strong. He raised his hand, a new Rasengan forming, its hum a death knell in the silent chamber. Wait, Naruto paused, turning to see a figure standing in the shattered doorway. The man was tall and gaunt, wrapped in a heavy cloak that obscured his features. But it was his chakra, or rather, the lack of it, that sent a shiver down Naruto's spine. It was a void, a chilling emptiness that felt utterly alien. The boy is of no further use to you, the cloaked figure said, his voice a dry, rustling whisper, like leaves skittering across a grave. But his existence is an affront to the natural order. Allow me to correct this imbalance. Before Naruto could react, the cloaked figure raised a hand. There was no jutsu, no flash of chakra, just a simple gesture. The elder, who had been struggling to his feet, suddenly froze. His eyes went wide with terror, and then his body began to desiccate, to crumble into dust, as if his very life force was being siphoned away. In seconds, all that was left was a pile of gray ash and a set of robes. Naruto stared, his mind racing. What was that? It wasn't any ninjutsu he had ever seen. The cloaked figure turned his attention to Naruto, his hidden gaze feeling like a physical weight. You, too, are an imbalance. A vessel for a power that should have faded into myth. A serpent's child who defies the cycle of life and death. Naruto instinctively stepped in front of Chiyuya, his body a shield. Who are you? He demanded, his voice tight. We are the Shroud of Jofuku, the figure whispered. We are the guardians of the Great Wheel. We the ones who prune the branches that grow twisted and unnatural. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, are a blight we will cleanse. The figure raised his hand again, this time towards Naruto. But before he could unleash his terrifying power, a massive fist made of earth erupted from the ground, slamming into him. Jirobo, ever reliable, had arrived. The cloaked figure was thrown back, his form dissipating into a swarm of black moths that scattered into the shadows. Lord Naruto, are you all right? Jirobo's voice was a comforting rumble. Naruto didn't answer. He was still staring at the spot where the figure had vanished. The chilling words echoing in his mind. A blight we will cleanse. Let's go, he said finally, his voice hard. The mission is complete. He turned and walked out of the chamber, the dragon's eye clutched in his hand. Chiyuya followed close behind, her usual sarcastic remarks absent. She had seen it too, that unnatural power, that chilling void. As they made their way back to the rendezvous point, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced back at the village of Ishigaki, a place he had conquered, a place he had nearly died. But it was not the village that held his attention. It was the shadows, the darkness between the rocks and trees. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was just the beginning. The Shroud of Jofuku. He had a new enemy. Later that night, back in the relative safety of one of Orochimaru's hidden bases, Naruto stood before his father. The chamber was lit by the eerie green glow of giant vats filled with bubbling liquid. Specimens floating within like unborn nightmares. Orochimaru, his golden eyes slitted like a snake's, took the dragon's eye from Naruto, his long, pale fingers caressing the scroll case. Excellent work, Naruto-kun. He hissed, his voice a sibilant whisper. You have exceeded my expectations, as always. Naruto remained silent, his gaze fixed on his father. He did not mention the cloaked figure. The Shroud of Jofuku. This was his own battle to fight, his own mystery to unravel. He would not show weakness, not even to the man who had raised him. You seem troubled, Orochimaru observed. His perception as sharp as ever. Did you encounter any difficulties? Nothing I couldn't handle, Naruto replied, his voice even. Orochimaru smiled, a chilling expression that held no warmth. Good, that is what I expect from my heir. He turned his attention back to the scroll, his interest in Naruto's emotional state already fading. This will bring my research forward by leaps and bounds. You have done well. It was a dismissal. Naruto bowed, a gesture of respect that was ingrained in him, and turned to leave. As he walked through the cold, sterile corridors of the base, he passed Chiyuya's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the soft, melancholic notes of her flute. He paused, his hand hovering over the door. He thought of that moment in the chamber, his thumb brushing away the blood from her face, the sudden, sharp intake of her breath. He thought of how she had stood her ground against the elders, her music a shield and a sword. He thought of how He had instinctively moved to protect her from the cloaked figure. He lowered his hand and walked away, the haunting melody of her flute following him down the corridor. Theirs was a complicated relationship, a dissonant melody of rivalry and respect, of sharp words and unspoken understanding. But tonight, something had changed. A new note had been introduced into their song, a harmony that was both unexpected and, in a way he couldn't yet define, deeply resonant. In his own sparse quarters, Naruto unsealed a scroll of his own, one he kept hidden even from Orochimaru. It was a map, marked with the locations of his father's many hidden bases and laboratories. He dipped a brush in ink and made a new mark, a small, black moth, next to the location of Ishigaki. The Shroud of Jofuku. He would learn their secrets. He would understand their power. And then, he would destroy them. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the serpent's heir. And the world would learn to fear his name. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the silence. The air in Orochimaru's central laboratory hummed with a sickly green light, the glow emanating from a massive cylindrical tank that dominated the chamber. Inside, suspended in a bubbling, translucent fluid, was a man. Wires and tubes, like parasitic vines, burrowed into his flesh, connecting him to a complex array of seals and machinery that surrounded the tank. Naruto stood beside his father, his arms crossed, his violet eyes reflecting the grotesque scene. The dragon's eye scroll lay open on a nearby console, its ancient characters seeming to writhe under the artificial light. The Ishigaki fools believed it was merely a record of their lineage, Orochimaru mused, his voice a low hiss of excitement that barely concealed his predatory glee. He gestured a long, pale hand towards the tank. In truth, it is a key, a biological cipher that details the precise chakra pathways needed to forcibly awaken a dormant bloodline. Naruto's gaze drifted from the scroll to the man in the tank. He was a captured shinobi from a minor clan, one whose ancestors were rumored to have possessed a unique Kekkei Genkai involving the manipulation of magnetic fields. The ability had been lost for generations. A faded whisper in the clan's history. Orochimaru, in his eternal quest for knowledge and power, intended to resurrect it. The scroll provides the map, Orochimaru continued, his golden, slitted eyes fixated on his experiment, but the journey requires a catalyst. He tapped a control on the console. A high-pitched whine filled the lab, and the fluid in the tank began to churn more violently. The man's body convulsed, his silent scream visible in the tortured contortion of his face. His skin began to shimmer, a faint metallic sheen appearing and disappearing like a mirage. Veins bulged against his temples, glowing with a pulsating, silver light. Naruto remained impassive, his expression a carefully constructed mask of detached interest. He had witnessed countless experiments like this, each one a testament to his father's genius and his complete disregard for the sanctity of life. It was a philosophy that had been drilled into him since childhood. Sentiment was a weakness, and the pursuit of power was the only truly noble endeavor. The strong devoured the weak. It was the natural order of the world. And yet, as the man in the tank began to tear himself apart from the inside, his body unable to contain the raw, untamed power being forced into his chakra coils, Naruto felt a familiar, unwelcome flicker of something in his gut. It wasn't pity. Pity was for the weak. It was a distaste, a sense of inefficiency. This was a crude application of power, a bludgeon where a scalpel was required. The cellular rejection is higher than anticipated, Orochimaru murmured. More to himself than to Naruto, a frown of academic frustration on his face. He made a series of rapid adjustments on the console, his fingers flying across the seals. The subject's OWN genetic markers are resisting the activation sequence. Fascinating. The shimmering on the man's skin intensified, and small objects around the lab, scalpels, beakers, loose screws, began to tremble and lift into the air. Drawn towards the tank by an invisible force. The magnetic field was manifesting, but it was chaotic, uncontrolled. A weapon without a wielder. It's going to overload, Naruto stated, his voice cutting through Orochimaru's scientific musings. He pointed towards a hairline crack that had appeared in the reinforced glass of the tank. The resonant frequency is unstable. You're tearing his coils apart. And he's taking the lab with him. Orochimaru's eyes snapped to the crack, then to the readings on his monitor. Annoyance flashed across his features. A minor setback. With a flick of his wrist, he slammed his hand down on a large, red seal on the console. The power cut out. The humming ceased, the green glow faded, and the metallic objects clattered to the floor. Inside the tank, the man went limp, the silver light in his veins extinguishing. He was no longer a subject, merely a corpse floating in murky fluid. A failure, a waste of a perfectly good specimen, Orochimaru sighed, his disappointment purely that of a researcher who had lost valuable data. He turned to Naruto, his serpentine eyes appraising. You have a keen eye for detail, Naruto-kun. You saw the overload before the instruments even registered the danger. Your senses are becoming more refined. I felt the chakra, Naruto replied simply. It was screaming. Orochimaru's lips curved into a thin smile. Indeed, a symphony of agony. There is much to be learned from it. He gestured for his medical assistants to dispose of the failed experiment. The principle is sound, however. With a more resilient vessel, the dragon's eye will unlock untold potential. His gaze lingered on Naruto for a moment, a speculative gleam in his eyes that always set Naruto on edge. The implication was clear. One day, he might be the subject in the tank. Or perhaps, the one conducting the experiment. The line between the two was always perilously thin in Orochimaru's world. You are dismissed, Orochimaru said, turning his attention back to the scroll, his mind already moving on to his next theory, his next subject. Naruto bowed and left the laboratory, the sterile silence of the corridor a welcome relief from the symphony of agony. The image of the convulsing man, the scent of ozone and cooked flesh, lingered in his mind. He walked, his footsteps echoing in the stone passageways of the hidden base, his destination clear. He needed to wash the stench of the laboratory from his senses. He needed a different kind of symphony. He found her in Training Ground 3, a vast, subterranean cavern designed to simulate a rocky, unforgiving landscape. Chiyuya was perched on a high stone pillar, her flute to her lips, playing a sharp, staccato melody that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Around her, 3 massive, summoned doki, ogre-like demons controlled by her music, lay in pieces, their clay-like bodies riddled with holes and slashes. She had been training hard. She stopped playing as he approached, lowering her flute and fixing him with her usual defiant glare. "What do you want, Lord Naruto?" she asked, the honorific dripping with its customary sarcasm. "A spar," he said, getting straight to the point. He unbuttoned the high collar of his robe, shrugging it off and tossing it aside, leaving him in a simple black, sleeveless tunic and pants that allowed for maximum freedom of movement. Chiyuya's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She hopped down from the pillar, landing with a light, feline grace. "A spar? Don't you have more important things to do? Like watching your father play God with some poor bastard in a fish tank?" Her words were a direct hit, a confirmation that little went on in the base without her knowing. She was far more perceptive than she let on. "Father's work can be illuminating," Naruto replied, his voice neutral, "but I prefer a more practical application of my skills." He stretched his arms, his muscles coiling like a predator's. "And I haven't had a decent challenge since Ishigaki." It was both a compliment and a taunt, and she took it as such. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across her face. "A challenge? You think you can keep up with me, pretty boy? Do NT cry to me when my music turns that brain of yours into scrambled eggs." "I'll take my chances," he said, his own smile mirroring hers. The air between them shifted, the lazy tension of their usual banter replaced by the sharp, focused energy of 2 fighters about to clash. There was an unspoken agreement. This would not be a simple training exercise. This was a test. Chiyuya attacked first, as he knew she would. She was all aggression, a whirlwind of passion and fury. She brought the flute to her lips, but not to play. Instead, she charged, using the hardened instrument as a makeshift staff. A series of lightning-fast jabs and swings aimed at his vital points. Naruto met her flurry of attacks with practiced ease, deflecting her blows with his forearms, the impacts echoing like drumbeats in the cavern. He was faster than her, stronger than her in a purely physical contest, but she was relentless, her movements unpredictable, her rage giving her a wild, ferocious edge. "Too slow," he taunted, sidestepping a vicious swing aimed at his head and tapping her lightly on the shoulder. "Shut up," she snarled, spinning into a low kick that he was forced to leap back to avoid. She used the space he had given her to bring her flute to her lips and play a single, piercing note. It wasn't genjutsu, not yet. It was a focused blast of sound, pure concussive force. The air itself seemed to ripple, and Naruto felt the impact like a physical blow, staggering him for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening she needed. She was on him again, her flute a blur, but this time, he was ready. He caught the end of her flute in his hand, their faces just inches apart. He could feel her breath on his skin, see the fire in her brown eyes. "My turn," he whispered. He twisted his grip, wrenching the flute from her hand and tossing it aside. Her eyes widened in shock. Without her instrument, she was at a disadvantage. But Chiyuya was never one to be easily defeated. She snarled and launched herself at him, her fists and feet a desperate, furious assault. Naruto didn't block, he flowed. He moved with her, becoming her shadow, redirecting her momentum, turning her own strength against her. It was the serpent's grace, a taijutsu style Orochimaru had taught him, one that emphasized fluidity, evasion, and precise counter-strikes. He spun her around, her back pressed against his chest, his arm locking around her throat in a chokehold. "Yield," he breathed into her ear, his voice a low rumble. He felt her body tense, her struggles growing weaker. For a moment, he thought she would submit. But then, she did something he didn't expect. She relaxed completely, going limp in his arms. It was a classic misdirection. As he instinctively loosened his grip, her head shot back, slamming into his nose with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded in his face, and his vision swam with stars. His hold broke, and she scrambled away, a triumphant, feral grin on her face. Blood trickled from his nose, hot and wet against his lips. "Not bad," he said, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand. He could feel the cartilage shifting back into place, the Kyuubi's chakra already healing the damage. "You fight dirty. I fight to win," she retorted, retrieving her flute. "A lesson you should have learned by now." This time, she didn't charge. She brought the flute to her lips and began to play. The melody was insidious, a creeping, discordant tune that seemed to crawl directly into his skull. Demonic flute. Phantom sound chains. The world around Naruto began to warp. The stone pillars twisted into grotesque, leering faces. The ground beneath his feet felt like quicksand, pulling him down. He felt invisible chains wrapping around his limbs, heavy and cold, paralyzing him. It was a powerful genjutsu, one that could incapacitate even the most experienced shinobi. But Naruto was not like most shinobi. He closed his eyes, shutting out the horrifying illusions. He focused inward, reaching for the vast, burning ocean of chakra that resided within him. He felt the familiar, malevolent presence of the nine-tailed fox, a caged god of destruction roaring in the depths of his soul. He did not draw on its power directly. That was a last resort, a line he rarely crossed. Instead, he used the sheer force of his own will, amplified by the fox's latent energy, to disrupt the flow of Tayuya's chakra in his system. He roared, a wave of pure, untamed chakra erupting from his body. The illusion shattered like glass. The chains vanished, the leering faces crumbled back into stone, and the ground was solid once more. Tayuya stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had never seen anyone break her phantom sound chains with such raw, explosive force. It was like trying to catch a tsunami in a net. "My turn," Naruto said again, his voice now holding a dangerous edge. His violet eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the cavern. He formed a series of hand seals, his fingers a blur of motion. Wind style. Serpent's kiss. Quote, he didn't create a single tendril of wind this time. He created a dozen. They shot out from him, invisible and silent, a swarm of ethereal vipers striking from all directions. Chiyuya's eyes went wide. She couldn't see the attack, but she could feel it. Her instincts, honed by countless life or death battles, screamed at her. She played her flute, not a genjutsu melody, but a series of sharp, explosive notes that sent out defensive shockwaves, trying to intercept the unseen assault. Some of the wind serpents were disrupted, but not all. 2 of them found their mark. One struck her in the shoulder, another in her leg. She cried out in pain, stumbling, the impacts feeling like being pierced by superheated needles. They were designed not to kill, but to paralyze, to overload the nervous system. She fell to one knee, her flute clattering to the ground. She was breathing heavily, glaring up at him with a mixture of pain, frustration, and something else, a grudging respect. Naruto walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of her, looking down at her defeated form. The spar was over. He had won. He offered her his hand. She stared at it for a moment, then slapped it away. "I don't need your help," she spat, using a nearby rock to pull herself to her feet, her legs still trembling. "I know," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He picked up her flute and handed it to her. "Your control has improved." The genjutsu was almost instantaneous. She snatched the flute from him, her expression a mixture of suspicion and surprise. She had expected him to gloat, to mock her defeat. Instead, he was complimenting her. It was disarming. You broke my nose," she grumbled, avoiding his gaze. He touched his own nose, which was now fully healed. "And you healed it. The Kyuubi has its uses." He hesitated for a moment. "The way you broke my hold, it was clever. Unorthodox." She finally met his eyes, a faint blush on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the exertion of the fight. "You left yourself open. Got cocky." "Maybe," he admitted, a small smile playing on his lips. "It won't happen again." The air was thick with an unspoken understanding. They had pushed each other, tested each other's limits. In the heat of their battle, a new level of respect had been forged. He saw her not just as a subordinate, a loud-mouthed flutist, but as a skilled and cunning warrior. And she, in turn, saw him not just as Orochimaru's heir, a privileged prodigy, but as a fighter who had earned his power, one who could match her in both skill and spirit. "Next time," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual fire, "I won't go so easy on you." "I'm counting on it," he replied. He turned and walked away, retrieving his robe. As he left the training ground, he could feel her eyes on his back. The echoes of their battle still resonated in the cavern, but they were overshadowed by a new, quieter echo, a silent understanding that had passed between them. Later, in the sterile quiet of the archives, Naruto found what he was looking for. Not in the public records, but in the hidden annex, the place where Orochimaru kept his most private and dangerous research. It was a risk to be here, but one he had to take. He had approached Kabuto earlier, a verbal sparring match that was almost as intense as his fight with Tayuya. Kabuto, with his perpetually smiling face and round glasses, was Orochimaru's most trusted subordinate, a master of espionage and medical ninjutsu. He was also a snake in his own right, his loyalty always a question of convenience and self-preservation. "The Shroud of Jofuku," Kabuto had said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Never heard of them. Are they a new mercenary group?" "They're not mercenaries," Naruto had stated, his gaze unwavering. "They use a technique I've never seen before. It drains the life force, turns a person to dust. No hand seals, no visible chakra." Kabuto's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "How fascinating. And you encountered these individuals where, exactly?" "During the Ishigakure mission. It was an unforeseen complication." Naruto left out the part where he was their target. "I need to know who they are. What they are. Check your networks. I want any and all information you can find." "This is a significant request, Naruto-kun," Kabuto had purred, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Information of that nature, it requires resources. Time. And Lord Orochimaru does not like his resources being used for personal projects." "Then he doesn't need to know," Naruto had countered, his voice dropping, taking on the cold, commanding tone he had inherited from his father. "Consider it a personal favor. One that I will be sure to remember when I am in a position to grant favors of my own." The unspoken promise hung in the air between them. Kabuto, ever the pragmatist, understood. He had given a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I will see what I can find." But Naruto wasn't one to wait. He was conducting his own research. Using the keyword Jofuku, he sifted through Orochimaru's digital archives. Most of it was useless, alchemical texts, historical records of minor lords. But then, he found it. A fragmented, heavily encrypted research file, buried deep within a subfolder labeled Heresy. The title was A Study of Chakra Annihilation and the Jofuku Heresy. It was a text Orochimaru had acquired decades ago, a transcription of a much older, forbidden scroll. It spoke of a monastic order that predated the hidden villages. A group of ascetics who believed that chakra itself was a blight, a corruption of the natural world gifted by a false god, the Sage of Six Paths. They believed that ninjutsu was an abomination, a twisting of the life force. Their goal was not to control chakra, but to eradicate it. To return the world to a state of purity. They had developed techniques, not from chakra, but from manipulating the very essence of life force. What the scroll called prana. They could sever a shinobi's connection to their chakra, or, in its most extreme application, unravel a person's life force completely, causing the rapid desiccation he had witnessed in Ishigakure. The scroll called them the pruners of the sacred tree, the guardians of the great wheel. The Shroud of Jofuku. A chill went down Naruto's spine. These were not simple assassins or rival shinobi. They were zealots, fanatics with an ideology that struck at the very heart of his existence. To them, he, a Jinchuriki, the vessel of a massive concentration of chakra, was the ultimate blasphemy. He wasn't just an enemy. He was a symbol of everything they sought to destroy. His research was cut short by a summons. His father required his presence. When he entered the throne room, a cavernous chamber dominated by a giant coiled serpent carved from stone, he found Orochimaru in discussion with two others. One was Kabuto, the other was an envoy from Kusagakure, the village hidden in the grass. The man was dressed in the formal green and brown robes of his village, but his eyes darted around nervously, and a fine sheen of sweat covered his brow. And so, Lord Shima extends an invitation to formalize the treaty between our villages, the envoy was saying, his voice strained. She proposes a meeting, in Kusagakure, to finalize the terms of our alliance. Orochimaru lounged on his stone throne, a look of bored amusement on his face. An alliance, he hissed. Kusagakure has been a thorn in my side for years, a persistent weed in my garden. Why this sudden desire for friendship, I wonder? Lord Shima believes that in these uncertain times, strength must be consolidated, the envoy stammered. Konoha grows more aggressive. Iwa and Kumo are rattling their sabers. A pact between Otogakure and Kusagakure would be mutually beneficial. I see, Orochimaru said, his golden eyes narrowing. And what does Kusagakure offer? In this mutually beneficial arrangement, access to our trade routes, intelligence on the Land of Fire's border patrols, and a gesture of goodwill. The envoy produced a small, sealed scroll. AAC. Copy of our Academy's most advanced herbalism texts. Orochimaru let out a soft, contemptuous chuckle. Herbalism. How quaint. He waved a dismissive hand. Naruto. Naruto stepped forward. Father. Quote, you will take your team and accompany this gentleman back to Kusagakure, Orochimaru commanded. You will represent me in these negotiations. Be persuasive. His eyes met Naruto's, and a silent message passed between them. The treaty was a sham, a pretext. Orochimaru didn't care about trade routes or alliances with a village as fickle as Kusa. He wanted something else. After the envoy was escorted out, Orochimaru elaborated. Shima is a cunning but predictable woman. This invitation is a trap. She likely intends to ambush and kill you, to send a message. She sees you as my heir, a symbol of my power. By eliminating you, she believes she can weaken my position. Then why send me? Naruto asked. Because we will be using her trap to spring one of our own, Orochimaru replied, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Kusagakure's archives contain a kinjutsu that I have long coveted, the corpse soil clone technique. It allows the user to create perfect, living clones from the soil. Nourished by the chakra of a human sacrifice. A truly magnificent jutsu. While Shima is busy trying to kill you, your team will infiltrate their archives and retrieve it. And the negotiations? A distraction. Play her game. Flatter her. Challenge her. It matters not. Simply keep her attention fixed on you. Once you have the scroll, you may deal with her and her village as you see fit. Burn it to the ground for all I care. Orochimaru's eyes gleamed. Consider this another test, Naruto-kun. A test of your ability to command, to deceive, and to be utterly ruthless. Do not disappoint me. The journey to Kusagakure was tense. The thick, humid air of the land of grass clung to them like a shroud, the incessant buzz of insects a constant, maddening chorus. Jirobo lumbered along, his silence a comforting, solid presence. Kitamura, true to form, scurried through the treetops, his 6 arms giving him an unsettling, insect-like mobility, his occasional cackles echoing through the canopy. Naruto walked beside Tayuya. Since their spar, the dynamic between them had changed. The sharp, sarcastic barbs were still there, but they were coated less in venom and more in a kind of familiar, competitive affection. So, Lord Ambassador, she began, her tone mocking, got your big speech prepared. Going to bore them into submission with talk of trade deficits and mutual non-aggression pacts. Something like that, Naruto replied. A faint smile on his lips. I was thinking of opening with a joke about a tsuchikage and a pot of tea. She snorted. Hilarious. I'm sure they'll be so charmed Why'll just hand over their most forbidden jutsu. She glanced at him, her expression turning more serious. This is a trap, you know that. Of course, he said. That's what makes it interesting. You're too confident, she shot back. One of these days, that arrogance is going to get you killed. It hasn't yet, he said simply. He stopped, his head cocked. Did you hear that? She paused, straining her ears. Hear what? The 1,000,001 damn bugs in this swamp. No, he said, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Silence. She focused, and then she understood. The ever-present buzz of the insects had stopped. The air was unnaturally still, heavy and watchful. It was the kind of silence that preceded an attack. From the trees, a volley of kunai and shuriken rained down on them. Jirobo reacted instantly, slamming his hands on the ground. Earth style. Earth dome. A massive hemisphere of rock erupted from the ground, enclosing Naruto and Tayuya, the weapons clattering harmlessly against its surface. Ambush. Kidomaru's voice called down from the canopy. About 20 of them. Kusa Anbu. Sloppy. Deal with them, Naruto's voice commanded from within the dome. No survivors. Outside, the sounds of battle erupted. The wet thud of blows, the clang of steel, the sickening squelch of Kidomaru's golden webs ensnaring his prey, and Jirobo's furious roars as he burst from the earth to engage the enemy. Inside the dome, it was dark and cramped. Naruto and Tayuya stood close, the silence punctuated by the muffled sounds of the fight outside. Looks like they didn't even want to wait until we got to the village. Tayuya muttered, her hand resting on her flute. Impatient, Naruto agreed. He could feel the vibrations of the battle through the soles of his feet. He was completely calm, his mind already calculating, strategizing. This was just a preliminary probe, an attempt to gauge their strength. The real fight was yet to come. When the sounds of battle died down, Jirobo lowered the dome. The small clearing was a scene of carnage. The bodies of 20 Kusagakure Anbu lay scattered amongst the ferns and ancient trees, dispatched with brutal efficiency by Kidomaru and Jirobo. That was the welcoming committee, Kidomaru cackled, wiping a viscous golden fluid from one of his many hands. Not very welcoming. Let's move, Naruto ordered, his gaze already fixed on the path ahead. We don't want to be late for the party. Kusagakure was a village built into a series of giant, hollowed-out trees, a network of bridges and platforms high above the swampy ground. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way. And it reeked of deception. They were met by Shima, the leader of the village. She was a tall, statuesque woman with long, green hair and eyes the color of jade. A disarming smile was plastered on her face, but her chakra felt coiled and tense, like a snake ready to strike. Lord Naruto, she said, her voice smooth as silk. An honor to finally meet the famed heir of Otogakure. I trust your journey was pleasant. It had its moments of excitement, Naruto replied, his own smile just as false, his gaze sweeping over the Kusa shinobi flanking her. They were trying to be subtle, but he could feel their killing intent, a low hum beneath the veneer of diplomacy. The negotiations took place in the Grand Council chamber, a massive chamber at the heart of the largest tree. The air was thick with the scent of incense and unspoken threats. Shima spoke at length about prosperity and mutual respect, her words a carefully woven tapestry of lies. Naruto played his part, nodding, asking pertinent questions, feigning interest. All the while, he was expanding his senses, mapping the layout of the chamber, noting the positions of the hidden Anbu, feeling the BTLE thrum of the chakra-suppressing seals that had been discreetly activated in the walls. Tayuya, Kidomaru, and Jirobo stood behind him, silent and still as statues, but he could feel their readiness. A palpable tension that promised violence. And so, Shima concluded, her smile widening, to seal our new alliance, I propose a ceremonial toast. Servants brought out cups of sake. Shima raised her cup, to a long and prosperous friendship. Naruto picked up his cup, sniffed it delicately, and then set it back down, untouched. I'm afraid I must decline, he said, his voice dropping its diplomatic warmth and taking on a cold, hard edge. The poison you've used has a rather unpleasant aftertaste. Shima's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. The mask was off. So, the serpent's whelp has fangs of his own. She hissed. A pity. I would have preferred a cleaner death for you. I prefer this way, Naruto replied, a dangerous glint in his violet eyes. It's more honest. The trap was sprung. Anbu dropped from the ceiling. The paper screens lining the walls fell away to reveal dozens more, all with weapons drawn. The doors were barred shut. They were surrounded. Kill them, Shima commanded. And bring me the boy's head. The chamber exploded into a maelstrom of violence. But the sound four were ready. Jirobo, the walls, Naruto yelled. Jirobo roared, slamming his fists together. Earth style. Rock breaker. He charged the wall, smashing through the stone and wood, creating an escape route and disrupting the chakra-suppressing seals. Kidomaru, the ceiling. Kidomaru cackled, spitting a massive, sticky web that covered half the ceiling. trapping the Anbu who were trying to drop down. Chiyuya. The music. Chiyuya brought her flute to her lips and played a maddening, chaotic tune. The Kusa shinobi clutched their heads, their formations breaking as the powerful genjutsu tore at their minds. And Naruto went for Shima. He moved through the chaos, a blur of motion. Kusa shinobi tried to intercept him, but he dispatched them with brutal, efficient grace. A kunai to the throat, a wind-infused kick that broke ribs, a Rasengan that tore through 3 men at once. He was a whirlwind of death. His focus absolute. Shima was no mere politician. She was a powerful kunoichi, a master of plant-based ninjutsu. Vines erupted from the floorboards, lashing out at him like thorny whips. He danced around them, his movements fluid and serpentine. "You were a fool to challenge me in my own home," she screamed, weaving a new set of hand signs. Wood style. Thorn prison. The entire chamber seemed to come alive. The wooden walls and floor groaned, and massive, thorny branches shot out, attempting to impale and crush him. He was relentless, using his wind jutsu to slice through the branches. His taijutsu to evade the unavoidable. He broke through her defense, his fist connecting with her jaw. She staggered back, shock and pain on her face. He gave her no time to recover. He was on her, a relentless assault of fists and feet, driving her back across the chamber. He was stronger, faster, and far more ruthless. The battle was short and decisive. The sound. 4 were a finely tuned instrument of destruction, and the Kusa Anbu, for all their numbers, were no match for their power and coordination. Naruto cornered a beaten and bloodied Shima against the far wall, a kunai pressed to her throat. The fighting had stopped. His team had secured the area. "The corpse soil clone jutsu," Naruto said, his voice a low, cold whisper. "Where is it?" Shima laughed, a ragged, bloody sound. "Kill me. I will never betray my village." Naruto's eyes hardened. He looked past her, at the remaining Kusa shinobi, her most loyal guards, now held captive by his team. "I have no quarrel with your village," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Only with you. However, if you force my hand, I will burn this entire forest to the ground, starting with every man, woman, and child in it. Your loyalty will be their death sentence." The scroll. Now, it was a cold, calculated threat, a page taken directly from Orochimaru's playbook. Shima stared into his merciless violet eyes and saw no bluff. Her bravado crumbled. Defeated, she told him where the scroll was hidden. As Kitamura retrieved the jutsu from its secret compartment, Naruto's gaze swept across the ruined chamber. His eyes fell upon a large, decorative carving on the wall behind Shima's throne, partially shattered by the fighting. It depicted the history of Kusagaku. And there, carved into the background of a scene depicting an ancient war, was a symbol he now knew all too well. A small, stylized black moth. His blood ran cold. The shroud of Jofuku. They had been here. Their influence was present even in a backwater village like this. Was it a coincidence? Or had they orchestrated this entire affair, manipulating Kusa into attacking him? Was this another test? Another attempt to prune the twisted branch? He pocketed the scroll containing the corpse soil clone jutsu. The mission was a success. But as he led his team out of the smoldering ruins of the Kusa Council chamber, a far more dangerous and complicated reality began to dawn on him. His enemies were not just the great shinobi villages or his father's political rivals. There was another, older, more insidious enemy lurking in the shadows. And they were hunting him. The echoes of his battle with Chiyuya, the whispers from his father's forbidden scroll, and the silent, carved moth on the wall all swirled together in his mind, forming a dissonant, terrifying new melody. The song of his life was becoming far more complex, and far more deadly, than he had ever imagined. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Corpse Soil. The return to Otogaku was a descent into the familiar, sterile chill of Orochimaru's domain. The air, thick and humid in the land of grass, was replaced by the cold, dry atmosphere of stone and antiseptic. A scent Naruto associated with home. He walked the long, torchlit corridor leading to the throne room, his team flanking him, the stolen scroll from Kusagaku sealed safely within his robes. They moved with the quiet confidence of a pack of wolves returning from a successful hunt, their steps echoing in the silence. The massive stone serpents that formed the throne room seemed to watch him as he entered. their carved eyes gleaming in the flickering torchlight. Orochimaru was where he always was, lounging on the central throne, a picture of languid, reptilian grace. Kabuto stood at his side, his face an unreadable mask behind his round glasses, a ledger of some kind in his hands. "Ah, Naruto-kun," Orochimaru hissed, his lips curling into a smile that was all teeth. "You have returned. I trust the gardens of Kusagakure were to your liking." "They were overgrown and in dire need of pruning," Naruto replied, stepping forward. He reached into his robes and produced the scroll, its casing still bearing the faint scent of old wood and Shima's desperation. He held it out, not with the deference of a mere subordinate, but with the assurance of a partner delivering on a contract. The corpse soil clone technique. As requested, Kabuto stepped forward to take the scroll, but Orochimaru raised a hand, stopping him. The Sannin's golden, slitted eyes remained fixed on Naruto, searching, probing. "The details of the mission, if you would. I find the process as often as illuminating as the result." Naruto's face was a study in calm neutrality. He recounted the events with cold, clinical precision. The welcoming ambush, the farcical negotiations, the poisoned sake, the sprung trap. He detailed how he had turned Shima's plan against her, using the chaos to allow Kidomaru to secure the objective while he, Chiyuya, and Jirobo dismantled her forces. He painted a picture of absolute control, of a mission executed flawlessly. Shima became uncooperative, Naruto finished, his voice betraying no emotion. "I was forced to make an example of her and her personal guard. The rest of the village leadership fell in line. They will not be a problem for us again." He deliberately omitted two key details. He did not mention the symbol of the black moth, the sigil of the Shroud of Jofuku, he had seen carved into the wall. Nor did he mention that he had threatened to annihilate the entire village. The first was his own secret, a thread in a tapestry only he could see. The second was a matter of style. Orochimaru would have approved of the threat, but Naruto did not want his fat her to think his methods were merely a crude imitation of his own. He had made the threat not out of sadism, but out of a calculated desire for efficiency. It was a subtle but important distinction in his own mind. Orochimaru let the silence stretch, his gaze unwavering. He knew Naruto was leaving things out, he could sense it, the way a snake senses the heat of hidden prey. But the mission was a success, the prize was in his grasp. And his heir had demonstrated the precise brand of ruthlessness he had worked so hard to cultivate in him. "Excellent," Orochimaru finally purred, a sound of deep satisfaction. He gestured for Kabuto to take the scroll. "You have done well, my son. You are truly coming into your own." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a feverish, scientific lust. "Kabuto, prepare the laboratory. And find me a suitable vessel. The jutsu requires a living sacrifice, and I have a few disloyal subordinates whose final contribution to Otogakure is long overdue." A flicker of something, an idea, an opportunity, sparked in Naruto's mind. "Allow me to select the sacrifice," he said, his voice firm. Orochimaru's eyebrows raised fractionally. "Oh, and why is that?" "The mission in Kusagakure was a success. But it revealed a potential weakness in our ranks," Naruto stated, his tone shifting to that of a commander giving a report. "Our intelligence on Shima's inner circle was incomplete. Our infiltration of her archives was met with more resistance than anticipated. It suggests that our own information networks may have a leak. A weed in our own garden." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "There is a faction, loyal to a kunoichi named Gurren, that has been growing more vocal in their dissent. They see my position as your heir as a slight against their own ambitions. I believe they are a security risk. Let me use them. Let me turn their disloyalty into a tool for your research and a warning to any others who might question your authority." It was a bold move, a power play wrapped in the language of loyalty. He was taking a problem, Gurren's jealousy, and framing it as a solution to a problem he had just invented. Orochimaru studied him for a long moment, a genuine, predatory smile slowly spreading across his face. He saw the deception, the manipulation, the cold-blooded pragmatism. He saw himself. "Very well," he conceded, the single phrase a greater praise than any flowery compliment. "Deal with Gurren and her followers. Bring me the strongest among them. The rest are yours to dispose of. Show them the price of ambition." Naruto bowed. "As you wish, Father. He turned and left the throne room, the sound falling into step behind him. As the heavy stone doors closed, sealing them in the corridor, Tayuya moved up beside him. A leak, incomplete intelligence, she whispered, her voice laced with amusement. You were lying through your teeth back there. I was being strategic, Naruto corrected, not breaking his stride. Gurren and our sycophants have been a nuisance for months. It was time to pull the weeds. And you just volunteered to be the gardener, she shot back. She lowered her voice further. You didn't mention the moth. He glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. She had seen it too, then. Or at least, she had seen his reaction to it. It wasn't relevant to the mission report. The hell it wasn't, she muttered. Her brow furrowed in a rare display of concern. That thing in Ishigakure, that wasn't normal, Naruto. And now their mark shows up in a place we just happened to be attacking. That's not a coincidence. I know, he said. His voice a low murmur only she could hear. Which is why I'm handling it myself. I don't want my father involved. Not yet. She understood the unspoken part of that sentence. I don't want to become his next experiment in how to counter it. Their shared distrust of their master was a constant, unspoken bond between them. Fine, she said, her tone grudging. Keep your secrets. But don't be stupid. Whatever those things are, they're hunting you. Let them hunt, he replied, a dangerous glint in his violet eyes. They'll find the serpent is not easy prey. Gurren's F.A. Seishin had made their base in the eastern sector of the Odogakure stronghold, a network of tunnels and caverns that had once been used for mining. They were arrogant, believing their numbers and their leader's unique crystal-style Kekkei Genkai made them untouchable. They were wrong. Naruto did not launch a frontal assault. That was crude, inefficient. Instead, he became a ghost. He used his shadow clones. A jutsu he had mastered to a degree that would have shocked his former Konoha teachers, to map their tunnels, learn their patrol routes, and identify their command structure. He was a patient predator. And he was setting the perfect trap. He found Gurren in her personal chamber, a large cavern where jagged, beautiful, and deadly pink crystals grew from the floor and ceiling like the teeth of some great beast. She was practicing, creating intricate, razor-sharp projectiles from thin air. She was powerful, he had to admit. Her control was precise, but she was overconfident. Naruto, she sneered, not bothering to turn around as he emerged from the shadows. Come to bend the knee. To acknowledge that Lord Orochimaru chose his heir poorly. Something like that, Naruto said calmly, his presence filling the cavern. Jirobo sealed the entrance behind him, his massive form a wall of impassable stone. From other tunnels, the screams of Gurren's followers began to echo, a symphony of terror conducted by Tayuya and Kidomaru. Gurren's face paled, then contorted in a mask of rage. You dare, she shrieked, launching a volley of crystal shards at him. Naruto didn't even try to dodge. He simply held up a hand. And a swirling vortex of wind, a miniature Rasengan, formed in his palm. It didn't just block the shards, it caught them, grinding them into sparkling pink dust. Your jutsu is impressive, Gurren, Naruto said. His voice dangerously calm as he walked towards her, the spinning chakra in his hand a low, menacing hum. But it's brittle, all flash, no substance. Fear began to replace the rage in her eyes. She was a powerful kunoichi, but Naruto was something else entirely. He wasn't just powerful, he was an apex predator. His killing intent was a palpable force, cold and absolute. The fight was over before it began. He moved with a speed she couldn't track, a blur of black and gray. He disarmed her, broke her stance, and slammed a chakra-infused palm into her chest. It wasn't a lethal blow. But it was enough to shatter her resolve and leave her gasping for air on the crystal-strewn floor. You are the sacrifice, Naruto informed her, his shadow falling over her defeated form. Lord Orochimaru has a new jutsu to test. You should be honored. Your death will serve a purpose. He left Jirobo to secure their prisoner and rendezvoused with the rest of his team. Tayuya and Kidomaru had been brutally efficient. The rebellion was crushed. What about the rest of them? Kidomaru asked. A wide, six-armed grin on his face, eager for more slaughter. Leave them, Naruto commanded. A leaderless mob is not a threat. Let them serve as a message. The price of ambition is failure. Later that night, While the base buzzed with the news of Guren's failed coup and Orochimaru prepared for his experiment, Naruto initiated the second part of his plan. He created a single, perfect shadow clone. Its mission: to infiltrate the one place in Otogakur more dangerous than the throne room, Kabuto's personal archives. The clone, a silent, flickering copy of himself, moved through the hidden passages of the base, its senses on high alert. It bypassed the traps and surveillance CLS with an intimate knowledge born of years living in this serpent's den. It found Kabuto's private laboratory, a place filled with medical texts, anatomical charts, and vials of poison. While his clone searched, the real Naruto found himself unable to rest. He walked the silent corridors, the words of the Shroud's assassin echoing in his mind, "A blight we will cleanse." He ended up on a small, secluded balcony overlooking a vast subterranean forest, one of Orochimaru's more ambitious projects. The air was cool and damp, a welcome change from the recycled atmosphere of the base. Couldn't sleep either. He turned. Chiyuya was leaning against the railing, her pink hair almost glowing in the dim light of the phosphorescent fungi that dotted the cavern ceiling. "Just thinking," he said, coming to stand beside her. They were silent for a long time, a comfortable, shared silence that was becoming more common between them. It was a stark contrast to their usual verbal sparring. "When I was a kid," she said suddenly, her voice quiet, almost hesitant, "the other kids in my village, they called me a monster." She looked down at her flute, which she held in her hands. "Because of this. Because of my sound. They said it was unnatural. Cursed." Naruto looked at her, seeing for the first time not the abrasive, foul-mouthed Kunoichi, but a girl who had been ostracized for the very thing that made her powerful. It was a story he understood all too well. "They were afraid," he said. "People always fear what they don't understand." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, Orochimaru understood. He didn't care if it was a curse. He just cared that it was powerful. That's all any of us are to him, isn't it? Tools, weapons. We're more than that," Naruto said, his voice firm. He looked out at the dark, sprawling forest below. "A tool is useless without a hand to wield it. We decide how our power is used." She looked at him, her brown eyes searching his face in the dim light. "And how are you going to use yours, Naruto? When all of this is yours?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire hidden village. "What's the end game?" It was a question he had never truly allowed himself to consider. His life had been a series of objectives set by Orochimaru. Master this jutsu, complete this mission, eliminate this threat. The future was a vague concept, a promise of inheriting his father's power. But for what? Before he could answer, he felt a sharp, sudden jolt, a phantom pain in his mind. The connection to his shadow clone had been severed. It had been discovered, and destroyed, but not before it had found something. A single, fleeting image was burned into his memory before the clone dispersed. A small, leather-bound journal, hidden beneath a false bottom in one of Kabuto's drawers. And on its cover, embossed in faded gold leaf, was a small, elegant black moth. Kabuto. The snake in the grass was connected to the shroud. The summons came almost immediately. Orochimaru was ready. The experiment was about to begin. The ritual chamber was a massive, circular cavern, the walls covered in a complex, terrifying array of seals that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. In the center of the room, Guren was bound to a stone altar, her crystal style sealed by a series of chakra-suppressing needles Kabuto had expertly applied. She was defiant, spitting curses at Orochimaru, who simply watched her with an expression of detached, scientific curiosity. "The corpse soil clone jutsu is magnificent in its simplicity," Orochimaru explained to Naruto, who stood beside him on a raised platform overlooking the altar. "It uses the subject's life force and genetic information as a catalyst, mixing it with chakra-infused soil to create a living duplicate. A perfect, loyal soldier. And the sacrifice?" Naruto asked, his eyes on Guren. "Is reduced to a husk, their energy consumed by the jutsu. A small price to pay for eternal loyalty, wouldn't you agree?" Orochimaru's eyes gleamed as he nodded to Kabuto. Kabuto began the process. He placed the Kusagaker scroll on a pedestal and began to weave a long, complex series of hand signs. The seals on the walls began to glow brighter, the air crackling with energy. A large pile of specially prepared soil in front of the altar began to churn and move, as if it were breathing. Now, Orochimaru commanded. Kabuto slammed his palm onto the scroll. The seals flared, and a wave of dark, malevolent chakra shot out, striking Gurren. She screamed, a horrifying, soul-shattering sound as her life force was violently ripped from her body. Her skin grayed, her body shriveled, and in moments, she was nothing more than a desiccated corpse. The stolen life force, a swirling ball of sickly green energy, shot into the pile of soil. The earth roiled and churned, and from its depths, a figure began to rise. It was Gurren, her body formed from the dark, wet earth, but her eyes were empty, hollow. The corpse soil clone. Orochimaru laughed, a triumphant, exultant sound. It's a success, a perfect, living puppet. But something was wrong. Naruto could feel it. The chakra in the room was unstable. It was tainted. The corpse soil Gurren's head snapped up, its hollow eyes fixing on Orochimaru. And then another figure began to rise from the soil. And another. And another. What is this? Orochimaru hissed, his triumph turning to confusion. The jutsu should only create one clone. 10 clones of Gurren now stood before them, their earthen bodies still dripping with mud, their empty eyes all fixed on Orochimaru. And then they spoke, their voices a horrifying, overlapping chorus that echoed in the cavern. The serpent defies the cycle. The serpent is a blight. Kabuto's eyes widened behind his glasses. That wasn't part of the jutsu. The Gurren clones attacked. They didn't use crystal style. Instead, their hands elongated into sharp, muddy claws, and they moved with an unnatural, jerky speed. But their target wasn't Naruto or the others. It was Orochimaru. Traitors! Orochimaru shrieked, his own body contorting as he dodged their assault. He was powerful, but he was caught off guard, overwhelmed by the sheer number of identical, relentless attackers. Naruto's mind raced. Kabuto. The journal. The shroud. This wasn't a failed experiment. It was sabotage. Kabuto had altered the seals, twisting the jutsu, using Shroud's own ideology as a weapon to turn Orochimaru's new toy against him. He had orchestrated this entire event to eliminate his master. Tayuya, Kidomaru, Jirobo. Protect Lord Orochimaru, Naruto commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. He had to make a choice. Let Kabuto's plan succeed and be free of his father. Or save the devil he knew. For now, Orochimaru was his key to power, his shield against the world. His time would come, but it would be on his own terms, not as a pawn in Kabuto's and the Shroud's game. The Sound Four leapt into action, forming a defensive perimeter around the Sannin. Jirobo's earth walls blocked the clones. Advance, Kidomaru's webs ensnared them, and Tayuya's music, a disorienting, maddening shriek, seemed to cause their earthen bodies to momentarily lose cohesion. Naruto turned his attention to the source of the problem. Not the clones, but the altar, where the original Gurren's body lay, the dark chakra of the perverted jutsu still flowing from it. He had to sever the connection. He formed a Rasengan, the spiraling blue sphere, a beacon of pure, destructive power in the dark cavern. He leapt from the platform, soaring over the chaotic battle below. The clones sensed his intent and tried to intercept him, but he was too fast. He slammed the Rasengan into the altar. The resulting explosion was immense. The stone altar shattered, the seals on the walls overloaded and went dark. And the corrupted chakra flow was instantly severed. The corpse soil clones all froze. Then, with a collective, sighing groan, they crumbled into piles of inert, muddy soil. Silence descended on the ruined chamber. Orochimaru was breathing heavily, his robes torn, his face a mask of cold, murderous rage. He turned his serpentine gaze on Kabuto, who was already trying to look innocent and confused. You, Orochimaru hissed, his voice dangerously soft. You will explain this. Now. I don't understand, Lord Orochimaru, Kabuto stammered, pushing his glasses up his nose. The seals must have been unstable, a miscalculation in the original text. Naruto landed lightly beside them, his eyes fixed on Kabuto. He's lying, he said, his voice cold and clear. He sabotaged the ritual. He works for the Shroud of Jofuku. Kabuto's blood ran cold. He stared at Naruto, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking. How could you possibly know that? Your loyalty was always a commodity. Kabuto, Naruto said, his violet eyes seeming to see straight through him. And you finally found a higher bidder. Before Kabuto could respond, he moved with a speed that defied belief. He threw a smoke bomb to the ground, and in the ensuing confusion, he tried to escape. But he hadn't counted on Naruto. A shadow clone, hidden in the rafters since the beginning of the ritual, dropped down, tackling Kabuto to the ground. The real Naruto was on him in an instant, a kunai to his throat. The traitor was caught. Orochimaru looked from the captured Kabuto to Naruto, a complex mixture of fury, surprise, and a new, chilling level of respect in his golden eyes. His heir had not only saved his life but had also uncovered a conspiracy that had been festering right under his nose. "Well done, Naruto-kun," Orochimaru said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "It seems I have underestimated you. And you," he glared at Kabuto, "have made a grave miscalculation." He gestured to Kitamura and Jirobo. "Take him to the interrogation cells. I want to know everything. The Shroud of Jofuku, it seems I have a new pest to exterminate." As Kabuto was dragged away, Naruto stood amidst the wreckage of the chamber. He had won. He had exposed the traitor, saved his father, and solidified his position as the true heir. But it was a hollow victory. He now knew the Shroud of Jofuku were not just a band of zealots hunting him from the shadows. They had infiltrated his home, turned his father's most trusted subordinate, and had come dangerously close to throwing the entire balance of power into chaos. His enemy was closer, more intelligent, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He looked over at Yuya, who was watching him, her expression a mixture of relief and awe. She gave him a short, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement of the storm they had just weathered. An unspoken promise that they would face the next one together. The whispers of the corpse soil had fallen silent, but a new, more terrifying whisper had taken their place. The whisper of a hidden war that had just begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Drowning Land. The interrogation cells of Otogakur were a place devoid of hope. Carved from the deepest, coldest rock beneath the earth. There was no light save for the single, harsh glow seal on the ceiling, no sound but the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water seeping through stone, a constant, maddening metronome counting down a prisoner's final hours. Kabuto Yakushi was chained to the wall, his familiar round glasses gone, his face a swollen, bloody mess. But his eyes, when he managed to force them open, still held a spark of defiant intellect. Orochimaru stood before him, his features a mask of cold, scientific fury. He had dispensed with his usual languid posture. Now he stood coiled, a viper ready to strike, his long, pale fingers idly tracing the edge of a scalpel. Naruto stood in the shadows near the door, a silent observer. He had insisted on being present. This was his war as much as it was his father's. "The Shroud of Jofuku," Orochimaru hissed, his voice dangerously soft, a sound more terrifying than any shout. "You threw away decades of my trust, my patronage, for a cult of chakra-hating Luddites. I confess, Kabuto, I am disappointed. I thought you had better taste in allies." Kabuto coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. "They have a vision," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Clarity. You seek to pervert the world, to twist it into your own image through your profane science. They seek to heal it, to return it to its natural state, by turning people to dust." Naruto's voice cut through the gloom from the shadows. It wasn't a question, it was a condemnation. He stepped forward into the light, his violet eyes fixing Kabuto with an unnerving intensity. "There's no clarity in that, only annihilation." Kabuto's gaze shifted to Naruto, and a flicker of genuine hatred burned in his eyes. "You are the epitome of that perversion. A stolen power, a walking blasphemy. You are everything they exist to erase." "And who are they?" Orochimaru interjected, his patience wearing thin. He pressed the tip of the scalpel to Kabuto's cheek, the cold steel a stark contrast to the man's feverish skin. "Names, locations. I want to know who pulls the strings of this pathetic little puppet show." Under Orochimaru's expert, merciless questioning, a horrifying blend of medical torture and psychological warfare, the story came out in fragmented, pain-choked pieces. The Shroud was not a single organization, but a cellular network of true believers, spread across the continent, hidden within the populations of villages great and small. They had no single leader, but a council of elders who guided their holy mission. Their primary goal was the acquisition of ancient artifacts, items that predated the Sage of Six Paths, which they believed held the key to CR. Eating a ritual that would cleanse the world of chakra on a global scale. Kabuto had been their agent in Otogakur for years, feeding them information on Orochimaru's research into Jinchuriki and Kekkei Genkai. The very things they considered the world's greatest sins. The civil war in Kurigakure, Kabuto choked out after a particularly agonizing application of Orochimaru's medical ninjutsu. They see it as an opportunity, a sign. Orochimaru paused, his interest peaked. Go on. The bloodline purges, the Mizukage's persecution of those with Kekkei Genkai, Kabuto gasped. The shrouds see it as the world beginning to heal itself. They are fanning the flames, supporting the Mizukage's faction from the shadows, encouraging the slaughter. Every dead bloodline user is a victory for them. A step towards purity. Naruto's blood ran cold. The shroud wasn't just a hidden enemy. They were political agitators, ideological terrorists, manipulating world events to suit their fanatical agenda. The conflict in the Land of Water was no longer a distant problem. It was the next battleground. You have been informative, Orochimaru said, withdrawing the scalpel. His face held a look of chilling finality. He turned to leave. Naruto, he is yours. I am done with him. The stone door began to close, leaving Naruto alone with the broken man chained to the wall. Kabuto looked at him, a ragged, bloody smirk on his face. Go ahead, he wheezed. Kill me. My death will be a sacrifice to a greater cause. Can you say the same about your life, monster? Naruto walked forward until he was standing directly in front of Kabuto. He did not draw a weapon. He did not form a jutsu. He simply looked down at his father's most loyal servant, the man who had helped raise him, teach him, and who had ultimately betrayed them all. You're wrong, Naruto said, his voice quiet. Your death won't be a sacrifice. It won't be a martyrdom. It will be a disposal. The same as Gurren. The same as any other broken tool. He reached out and placed his hand on Kabuto's forehead. And I won't kill you. My father will find a use for your body, your mind, your research. You'll spend the rest of your miserable exes tense as a living specimen in his laboratory. You wanted to heal the world. You won't even be able to heal yourself. He channeled a precise, controlled burst of the Kyuubi's chakra, not enough to kill, but enough to fry Kabuto's nervous system, to shatter his mind and leave him a drooling, mindless shell. Kabuto's eyes went wide with a final, silent scream of terror as his intellect, the one thing he valued above all else, was systematically erased. Naruto turned and walked out of the cell, not looking back. He had passed judgment not with the rage of a warrior, but with the cold, detached pragmatism of a king. It was a far crueler fate than death. The information from Kabuto's interrogation had shifted the board entirely. Orochimaru, incensed that a rival faction was meddling in a conflict he had already been observing with interest, saw an opportunity to strike at both a continental rival and his new, hidden enemy. He summoned Naruto and the Sound Four to the war room, a chamber dominated by a massive map of the shinobi nations. The Land of Water is in chaos, Orochimaru began, his long finger tracing the coastline of the island nation. The current Mizukage, a man named Yagura, has initiated a brutal campaign against anyone possessing a Kekkei Genkai. He calls them abominations, a stain on the purity of his village. As a result, a powerful rebellion has formed, led by the remnants of the great clans, the Kagaya, the Yuki, the Hazuka. They are skilled, they are desperate, and they are losing. He looked directly at Naruto. Kabuto's confession has illuminated the Shroud's involvement. They are backing Yagura, pushing him towards greater and greater atrocities. They want the bloodlines wiped out. We, on the other hand, covet them. His lips curled into a hungry smile. This is our chance to acquire a vast collection of rare genetic material and simultaneously disrupt the Shroud's plans. You will go to the Land of Water. You will make contact with the rebel faction. You will offer them a deal. What kind of deal? Naruto asked. Sanctuary, Orochimaru answered. Weapons, resources, everything they need to not only survive, but to win. In exchange, they will DGE their loyalty, and their bloodlines, to Otogakur. I want you to secure the allegiance of these clans, Naruto. Not through conquest, but through diplomacy. Turn their desperation into our strength. And while you are there," his voice dropped, becoming a venomous whisper, "find the Shroud's agents. Find them, and eradicate them. I want to send their elders a message, written in the blood of their followers." It was a complex, delicate mission. Naruto would have to navigate the treacherous waters of a civil war, playing the part of a savior while acting as an agent of a foreign power. He would have to win the trust of proud, desperate warriors while simultaneously hunting a shadowy enemy. As they prepared for the long journey, Naruto sought out Tayuya. He found her not in the training grounds, but in the archives. A scroll of musical theory opened before her. The intensity of the past few days had left a mark on all of them, a grim tension that lingered in the air. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. She looked up, her usual abrasive energy muted. She simply nodded and followed him to the secluded balcony overlooking the subterranean forest. "The Shroud," he began, getting straight to the point. "Their goal is to destroy chakra. To erase people like us." "I heard," she said, her arms crossed, her knuckles white. "Fanatical bastards. They called me a blasphemy," Naruto continued, his gaze fixed on the artificial canopy below. "You said the kids in your village called you a monster for your abilities. It's the same thing. The same fear. The same hatred of anything different, anything powerful." He turned to face her, his violet eyes locking onto hers. "My father sees this war as an opportunity to collect new specimens. The Shroud sees it as a holy crusade. They're also blinded by their own goals. They can't see the people they're crushing. The Yuki clan, the Kagaya, they're being slaughtered for the crime of being born." Tayuya stared at him, surprised by the raw, unchanneled anger in his voice. This wasn't about strategy or power, this was something more personal. "What's your point?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "My point," he said, his voice hardening with resolve, "is that I'm not going to be a pawn in their game. Not my father's, and not the Shroud's. We're going to the land of water to complete our mission. But we're going to do it our way. I'm not just going to offer these people sanctuary in exchange for their servitude. I'm going to offer them a chance at revenge." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Tayuya's face. The fire was back in her eyes. This was the Naruto she understood, the one she respected. Not the cold, calculating heir, but the decisive, charismatic leader. "Now you're talking," she said. "So, what's the plan, Lord Naruto?" "The plan," he said, his own smile mirroring hers, "is to give the Mizukage and his new friends a war they won't forget." Their departure was set for the following dawn. As Naruto and his team made their final preparations in the armory, checking their supplies, a low-level Otogaker shinobi approached them, his face pale with fear. "Lord Naruto," he stammered, bowing low. "There is something you must see." At the western gate, Naruto's eyes narrowed. He exchanged a look with Tayuya and they followed the shinobi, the rest of the team close behind. The western gate was a minor exit, a tunnel that led out into the dense forests bordering the land of sound. The two guards who were supposed to be on duty were gone. In their place, in the center of the tunnel's mouth, was a pile of gray robes and a handful of dust. Resting atop the pile, starkly visible against the dark fabric, was a single, perfectly preserved black moth. Jirobo grunted, his hand tightening on his massive club. Kidomaru let out a low, guttural hiss, all six of his eyes narrowing. "A message," Tayuya breathed, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and disgust. "They're watching us," Naruto said, his voice a low, cold calm that was more chilling than any outburst of rage. He knelt, not touching the moth, but examining the scene. "They knew we were leaving. They knew we would use this gate." The implications were terrifying. Kabuto was gone, but the Shroud's infiltration of Otogaker was not. They still had eyes and ears inside his home. They weren't just hunting him. They were toying with him, leaving him a taunting reminder of their omnipresence. They were telling him that no matter where he went, they would be there, waiting in the shadows. Naruto stood up, his face an impassive mask, but his chakra flared for a brief, violent moment, a silent, primal roar of defiance. He looked at his team, at the grim, determined faces of the only people in this world he could truly rely on. "They want us to be afraid," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority in the stone tunnel. They want us to second-guess ourselves, to look for traitors in every shadow. We will not give them that satisfaction." He turned his back on the gruesome display. "Kitamura, find out who the guards were. Jirobo, seal this tunnel. We'll use a different exit." He started walking, his team falling into step behind him. Chiyuya was at his side. "You're just going to ignore it?" she asked, incredulous. "I'm not ignoring it," he replied, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I'm accepting it. This is the nature of our enemy. Devious, elusive, and arrogant." A predatory smile touched his lips. And arrogance can be a fatal weakness. They left Otogakur under the cloak of a moonless night, ghosts slipping into a world that was rapidly becoming a multi-front war zone. Behind them, they left a hidden village rife with paranoia and a traitor's empty cell. Ahead of them lay the sea, and beyond it, the drowning land. A nation tearing itself apart, a place where fanatics and warlords played games with the lives of thousands. Naruto felt the weight of it all. His father's ambitions, the desperation of the rebels he was meant to save. And the chilling, ever-present threat of the shroud. But it wasn't a weight that crushed him. It was a weight that focused him, that sharpened his senses and hardened his resolve. He was no longer just the serpent's heir, a pawn in a game of power. He was a player in his own right, and he was ready to make his first move on a board that spanned the nations. The whisper of the corpse soil had given way to the roar of a coming storm, and he was heading directly into its eye. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Price of Blood. The sea voyage to the land of water was a purgatory of gray. Gray skies bled into a gray, churning ocean, the horizon a line so blurred it felt as if they were sailing into nothingness. The salt spray was a constant, cold caress that caked their hair and clothes, and the mist, Kuragakur's most famous and suffocating feature, met them miles from shore, wrapping their small, unmarked vessel in a damp, silent embrace. It was a land that seemed to be actively trying to drown the world, to erase it under a blanket of oppressive haze. They made landfall not at a major port, but in a secluded cove known only to Orochimaru's network of spies, A.J. Agged scar in the coastline hidden by treacherous rocks and perpetual fog. The moment Naruto's feet touched the black, volcanic sand, he could feel it, the palpable misery of the nation. It was in the air, a scent beneath the salt and brine. The metallic tang of fear and shed blood. The very chakra of the land felt sick, twisted into knots of pain and paranoia. Their destination was Kiri no Minato, a port town that had swelled with the grim tide of war. It was a place of refugees and deserters, of bounty hunters looking to profit from the Mizukage's purges and rebels searching for new recruits. A microcosm of the nation's decay, and the perfect place to gather intelligence. They entered the town not as proud shinobi of Otogakur, but as weary travelers, their signature robes replaced with the drab, functional clothing of wanderers. The town was a maze of rickety wooden buildings, their timbers slick with moisture, leaning against each other as if for support against the crushing weight of the fog. The streets were mud, churned by the endless passage of feet, and the faces they passed were gaunt and hollow-eyed. Every shadow seemed to hold a spy, every whispered conversation felt like a potential death sentence. "Charming place," Chiyuya muttered, her hand never straying far from the flute slung across her back. "Smells like fish and desperation. Keep your senses sharp," Naruto murmured, his gaze sweeping across the crowded street, cataloging everything. "We're in the heart of the enemy's territory. Yagura's hunter nin are everywhere." They found lodging in a decrepit inn WH. Ere the proprietor's questions died in his throat after a single, cold glance from Naruto. From their grimy window, they could see the town square, a muddy, open space that served as Kiri no Minato's heart. And in the center of that square was a series of wooden posts, stained dark with blood. They didn't have to wait long to learn their purpose. An hour after their arrival, a squad of Kuragakur hunter nin marched into the square. Their blank, white masks with the village's symbol etched on them a terrifying sight. They dragged behind them a family, a man, a woman, and their 2 young children, a boy and a girl no older than 10. Their clothes were torn, their faces bruised, but their heads were held high with a defiant pride. "Citizens of Kiri no Minato," the lead hunter nin proclaimed, his voice amplified by a jutsu to carry over the murmuring crowd. "Behold the traitors of the Terumi clan. Though their blood is thin, it carries the taint of a Kekkei Genkai. For this crime, for harboring the potential of abomination, they have been sentenced to death by order of the Mizukage. The crowd was silent, a mixture of fear and grim acceptance on their faces. This was their reality now. A neighbor, a friend, a family could be condemned not for their actions, but for the very blood that flowed in their veins. The family was forced to their knees before the posts. Naruto watched from the window, his expression unreadable, his body unnaturally still. Beside him, he could feel Tayuya trembling, not with fear, but with a visceral, barely contained rage. "We have to do something," she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "They're just kids, Naruto. Intervening now would expose us to the entire town," Kidomaru pointed out from the corner of the room, his tone pragmatic and detached. "Our mission is to contact the rebellion, not to save every stray cat we find." "They're not stray cats, you six-armed freak," Tayuya snarled, spinning to face him. "Enough," Naruto's voice cut through the tension. Sharp and absolute, he hadn't taken his eyes off the scene in the square. Kidomaru was right, from a strategic standpoint. An open attack would be foolish, jeopardizing the entire mission for 4 strangers. But Tayuya was right, too. To stand by and watch this, it was a line he was unwilling to cross. This was the very cruelty the Shroud was encouraging, the very fire they were fanning. To ignore it would be to tacitly condone it. He saw his third option. It was risky, subtle, but it was his. "Tayuya," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The acoustics of this square. The buildings are close. The fog is thick. It would amplify and distort sound, wouldn't it?" She looked at him, her eyes widening as she understood his intent. A slow, predatory grin replaced her anger. "Like a goddamn echo chamber. Jirobo," Naruto continued, "the foundations of that platform the Hunter Nin are standing on. You feel it. The ground beneath is saturated, unstable. Jirobo, hoo-ha." Bin, watching with a stoic silence that concealed a deep well of disgust, closed his eyes for a moment, his chakra reaching into the earth. He gave a single, curt nod. "Don't attack them directly," Naruto commanded. "Create a diversion, something they can't ignore. Tayuya, give them a ghost. Jirobo, give them an earthquake. Kidomaru, you're our eyes. Tell me if any reinforcements approach." He focused his own attention on the lead Hunter Nin, the one who had pronounced the sentence. Naruto created a minuscule shadow clone, no bigger than his thumb, and sent it scurrying down the wall of the inn, a tiny, almost invisible spider of chakra. In the square, the executioner raised his long-bladed sword. The mother squeezed her children's hands, whispering something to them, her face a mask of love and sorrow. And then the world dissolved into chaos. A sound, a horrifying, unearthly wail, erupted from all directions at once. It was a sound of 1,000 souls screaming, a sound of grinding metal and breaking bone. Tayuya stood in the shadows of the alley beside the inn, her flute to her lips, playing a melody of pure, unadulterated terror. The thick fog caught the sound, twisting and amplifying it, making it seem as if the very air was shrieking in agony. The Hunter Nin froze, their heads snapping up, trying to locate the source of the impossible noise. The crowd screamed and began to panic, shoving and stumbling over each other to flee the haunted square. At the same moment, the ground beneath the execution platform lurched violently. Jirobo, hidden in a cellar 2 buildings away, had slammed his palms into the earth, destabilizing the muddy foundations. The platform cracked and collapsed, sending the Hunter Nin tumbling to the ground in a heap of splintered wood. In the midst of the pandemonium, Naruto's micro-clone, having crawled up the lead Hunter Nin's back, channeled a single, razor-thin needle of wind chakra and severed the strap of his mask. The lead Hunter Nin, disoriented by the sound and the fall, scrambled to his feet, his mask clattering to the ground. His face was exposed for all to see. He was young, barely a man, his face twisted in a snarl of fear and confusion. "Hold your positions, it's a trick," he roared, trying to restore order, but his authority was gone. Without the mask, he was no longer a faceless instrument of the Mizukage's will. He was just a man the crowd now recognized. "That's Kenji," someone screamed from a nearby window. From the bakery, his cousin married a Hazuka. The accusation hung in the air, more devastating than any kunai. The Hunter Nin, the enforcer of the bloodline purges, had family ties to a clan with a prominent Kekkei Genkai. He was a hypocrite, a traitor to his own cause. His squadmates stared at him, their blank masks now seeming to hold expressions of accusation. The mission had fallen apart. Their leader was compromised. The element of terror was gone, replaced by chaos and suspicion. Fall back. The hunter Nin, Kenji, screamed, his face pale with panic. Fall back and regroup. They grabbed their fallen leader and vanished into the fog, abandoning their prisoners, their authority shattered. In the now empty square, the Terumi family knelt, stunned and disbelieving. Naruto watched as a cloaked figure darted from an alleyway, cut their bonds, and hurried them away into the labyrinthine streets of the town. The rebellion had its own agents here, it seemed. They just needed a chance to act. Not bad, Chiyuya said, rejoining them in the room, a look of grudging admiration on her face. No one saw us. We didn't throw a single punch, and the bad guys ran away with their tails between their legs. You're a sneaky bastard. It's called strategy, Naruto replied, though a faint smile touched his lips. They'll be investigating their own ranks for weeks. It buys the rebels time and sows discord among our enemies. His plan had worked perfectly. He had saved the family, struck a blow against the Mizukage's forces, and kept his own team's involvement a complete secret. He had found the third option. His actions did not go unnoticed. Later that night, as Naruto sat by the window, seemingly observing the fog-drenched streets, a single, sharp pebble tapped against the glass. He glanced down. A figure stood in the alley below, cloaked and hooded, their face obscured by shadow. The figure made a simple, coded gesture, a hand sign used by spies to signal a desire to parley. Naruto slipped out of the inn, melting into the shadows as easily as any native of the mist. He met the figure in the deepest part of the alley, the damp walls muffling any sound. That was a bold move in the square today, a woman's voice said from beneath the hood. It was calm, steady, with an edge of steel. Risky, and effective. My associates and I are curious. Who are you, and why are you interfering in Kurigaka's business? My name is Naruto, he said simply. I'm here to offer your associates a deal. The figure stiffened. What makes you think I have associates? You're a rebel, Naruto stated, not guessing. You were the one who freed the Terumi family after my diversion. You move with the confidence of a trained kunoichi, but your chakra feels different. Refined, like ice. He paused. You're a member of the Yuki clan. The woman slowly pulled back her hood. She was beautiful, in a severe, dangerous way, with pale skin, dark hair, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. She was Haku, but older, harder, her youthful innocence replaced by the grim resolve of a soldier in a losing war. In this timeline, her life had taken a different, more brutal path. You're well informed, she said, her voice cold, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. That doesn't answer my question. Who are you? I'm an envoy from a village that has a mutual interest in seeing the Mizukage fall, Naruto explained. My master is prepared to offer you weapons, funding, and a safe haven for your people. He wants to help you win this war. Haku laughed, a short, bitter sound. Help us. No one helps us for free. What does your master want in return? Our loyalty, our swords, our children, to be used as lab rats in his experiments. She had clearly heard of Orochimaru. He wants your survival, Naruto countered, his gaze unwavering. And yes, he wants an alliance. He wants your strength added to his. But I am not my master. I am here because I believe this purge is an obscenity. I am here to offer you not just survival, but retribution. The raw conviction in his voice seemed to startle her. She studied him, her icy gaze searching for the deception she was sure was there. Those are pretty words. This war has been full of them. We need more than words. I'm aware, Naruto said, which is why I'm prepared to offer a demonstration of my good faith. Oh, Haku asked, her skepticism thick. And what would that be? Take me to your leaders, Naruto said. Let me hear from them what you need most. A commander assassinated, a shipment of weapons intercepted, a prison camp liberated. Whatever it is, my team and I will accomplish it. Consider it a down payment on our future alliance. It was an audacious gamble. He was offering to undertake their most difficult mission, to throw himself and his team into the fire to prove his worth. It was the kind of bold, confident move that desperate people could either condemn as foolish or cling to as a new source of hope. Haku was silent for a long time, the mist swirling around them. She was weighing his words, judging his character. She had seen what he could do. The chaos he could orchestrate without revealing himself. It was a kind of power the rebellion desperately needed, not just brute force, but cunning. "There is a place," she said finally, her voice low. "An island fortress known as the Blood Prison. It's where Yagura keeps the most powerful Kekkei Genkai users he captures. Our comrades. Our families." Her eyes seemed to glitter with unshed tears. "The fortress is considered impregnable. It's surrounded by whirlpools and guarded by the best of Kiri's Anbu. We've tried to assault it twice. Both times, we were slaughtered." She looked him directly in the eye, her expression a mixture of challenge and despair. "You want to prove yourself. Free the prisoners of the Blood Prison. Do that, and the rebel clans will listen to whatever you have to say." Quote, this was it. The test. A suicide mission, by the sound of it. But it was also a chance to rescue powerful allies, to strike a massive blow against Yagura, and to earn the unwavering trust of the rebellion in a single, decisive action. And as he processed her words, a detail from Kabuto's interrogation surfaced in his mind. The Shroud. They are interested in places where Kekkei Genkai users are gathered. They see them as concentrated sources of the blight. The Blood Prison wasn't just a target for the rebellion. It was a potential target for the Shroud as well. A place where they might try to carry out a mass cleansing. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated, and infinitely more important. "Tell me everything you know about this fortress," Naruto said, his voice dropping, taking on the crisp, commanding tone of a general planning a campaign. There was no hesitation, no fear, only a focused, absolute resolve. "We attack at the next new moon." Haku stared at him, a flicker of something new in her frozen eyes. It wasn't skepticism or despair. It was the first, fragile glimmer of hope she had felt in a very long time. In the heart of the drowning land, under a suffocating blanket of fog and fear, a single, defiant flame had just been lit. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Blood Prison. The island rose from the churning, black sea like a jagged tooth. A fortress of dark, wet stone perpetually shrouded in a choking mist. This was the Blood Prison, Kurigakure's monument to cruelty, a place where shinobi with unique bloodlines were sent to be forgotten by the world. The new moon offered no light, and the only sounds were the roar of the ocean crashing against the cliffs and the hungry gurgle of the whirlpools that served as a natural, lethal moat. Naruto and his team were huddled in a small, waterproofed skiff, the tiny vessel tossed about by the violent currents. Haku had provided them with the boat and the knowledge to navigate the treacherous waters. A path that required perfect timing and a healthy dose of sheer nerve. Jirobo's brute strength at the oars was the only thing keeping them from being splintered against. The rocks are dragged into a watery grave. Charming, Tayuya hissed, her knuckles white as she gripped the side of the boat. "I think I'm going to be sick." "Save it for the guards," Naruto said, his voice a low command that cut through the ocean's roar. He was crouched at the prow, his violet eyes scanning the fortress, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. He could feel the chakra of He guards on the walls, over 100 of them, and beneath that, a deeper, more disturbing sensation. The faint, suppressed flicker of hundreds more, the prisoners, their life forces dampened to a bare minimum by the prison's seals. Their plan was a symphony of controlled violence, each member a crucial instrument. Kitamaru was the opening note, as their boat slipped into the relative calm of a sea cave at the base of the cliff. The spider-like shinobi disembarked, his 6 hands finding purchase on the slick, vertical rock face. He scurried upwards into the mist, a golden thread of chakra-infused silk unspooling from his mouth, creating a line for the others. He was a silent, multi-limbed phantom, a predator born for this kind of work. Naruto went next, ascending the line with a fluid, serpentine grace. Tayuya and Jirobo followed. They gathered in the shadow of a watchtower, the wind whipping at their clothes. Below them, Kitamaru was already at work. There was a faint thwip of his golden webs, a choked gurgle. And the 2 guards in the nearest tower slumped over, their bodies quickly cocooned and stuck to the dark stone, invisible from below. He gave a sharp, Clicking sound, the all clear. Chiyuya, your position is the northern parapet, Naruto whispered, pointing to a spot that offered a clear line of sound into the prison's main courtyard. Do not engage until you hear the primary breach. Give them hell. She grinned, a feral slash in the darkness. With pleasure. She vanished into the mist, as silent as a vengeful spirit. Jirobo, the western sea wall. Section 4, Naruto instructed. According to Haku, it was damaged in a storm last year and repaired hastily. It's the weakest point. When the prisoners are free, you are their exit. Bring the wall down. Jirobo grunted in acknowledgement, a sound like grinding stones, and lumbered off, his massive form surprisingly quiet on the stone battlements. Kitamura, Naruto said, turning to the last member of his team, W. Ho now hung upside down from the watchtower's overhang, his grin unsettling in the gloom. You have the perimeter. No one gets in or out. No signals leave this island. Make your nests. Already started, Kitamura cackled, holding up a handful of severed communication wires. He melted back into the shadows, a hunter relishing the prospect of a target-rich environment. That left Naruto. His target was the heart of the prison, the central control tower, where the master seal that suppressed the inmates' chakra was located. It was the deepest, most heavily guarded part of the fortress. He moved like smoke, a black-clad wraith flowing through the prison's outer courtyards. The air was heavy with the smell of brine, mildew, and despair. He kept to the rooftops, his movements economical and precise, his senses a constant. Sweeping radar, he passed over patrols, their bored conversations about watered-down sake and overdue paychecks reaching him as faint murmurs. They were oblivious, lambs unaware of the wolf in their midst. He slipped through an unguarded vent into the prison's upper levels, the transition from the cold, open air to the stuffy, oppressive atmosphere of the interior jarring. The corridors were narrow, carved from the same dark, weeping stone as the exterior. The only light came from flickering, chakra-fueled lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows. The place felt less like a prison and more like a tomb. He was moving down a long, deserted hallway when he saw it. A dead guard was slumped against the wall, but not in the way Kitamura would have left him. There was no visible wound, no sign of a struggle. The man's skin was gray and desiccated, his eyes and mouth were open in a silent, final scream, his body little more than a dried husk in a uniform. Naruto froze, his blood turning to ice. The shroud. They were here. His mission had just changed. This was no longer a simple prison break. It was a race. He and the shroud were both hunting the same prey, but for vastly different reasons. He wanted to free the Kekkei Genkai users. They wanted to cleanse them. He abandoned stealth for speed, his form a blur as he raced through the corridors. He found 2 more bodies, then 3. All in the same horrifying state. The shroud agents were moving with a terrifying efficiency, clearing a path, likely towards the main cell blocks. He rounded a corner and came face to face with one of them. The figure was clad in the same heavy, concealing robes as the one from Ishigakure, their face hidden in the deep shadow of a hood. They had been about to dispatch another guard, their hand raised, a faint, sickly aura of negative energy coalescing around their palm. The shroud agent reacted with inhuman speed, abandoning their target and launching themselves at Naruto. There was no sound, no battle cry, just a silent, swift movement of deadly intent. Naruto met the attack head-on, deflecting a claw-like strike aimed at his chest. The touch was freezing, and he felt a horrifying, leech-like sensation as the agent tried to draw on his life force. He leapt back, putting distance between them. So the rats have come out of their holes, Naruto snarled, falling into a low, predatory fighting stance. The blight must be purged, the agent whispered, their voice a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was the same chilling, fanatic tone. We will purify this cesspit. And you, the primary tumor, will be excised first. The agent, the purifier, attacked again. They didn't use traditional ninjutsu. They manipulated that same life-draining energy, firing bolts of it from their palms and creating a shimmering shield that seemed to devour the chakra from any jutsu Naruto threw at it. He launched a wind-style serpent's kiss. But the invisible tendril of wind dissipated harmlessly against the shield. Naruto's mind raced. Brute force was useless. This enemy was the antithesis of a shinobi. They didn't fight chakra with chakra, they erased it. He had to rely on something more fundamental. He feinted with a hand seal, prompting the purifier to raise their shield, and then charged, his real attack a purely physical one. The fight became a brutal, close-quarters dance of death. Naruto's taijutsu, the fluid, serpentine-style Orochimaru had taught him, was pitted against the purifier's strange, disjointed movements. It was like fighting a living void. Every time he landed a blow, he could feel the chilling energy trying to sap his strength. The purifier was strong, but Naruto was stronger, faster, and far more creative. He used the narrow corridor to his advantage, ricocheting off the walls, his movements unpredictable. He created a shadow clone as a decoy, and as the purifier turned to disintegrate it with a touch, the real Naruto struck from behind. He didn't use a chakra-infused strike. He drove a standard kunai blade, held in a reverse grip, deep into the joint between the purifier's neck and shoulder. The agent let out a shocked, hissing gasp, the sound inhuman. The life-draining energy around them flickered and died. Naruto wrenched the kunai free and kicked the agent hard in the chest, sending them stumbling back. "You talk of purity," Naruto growled, advancing on the wounded figure, "but you reek of death." The purifier clutched their shoulder, a dark, viscous fluid, not quite blood, seeping from the wound. "You cannot stop the cleansing," they rasped. "My brothers are already at the central cells. They are preparing the Great Seal of Annihilation. By the time you reach them, it will all be over." Naruto's eyes widened in horror. A mass execution. That was their plan. He didn't have time for this. He moved with blinding speed, not to kill, but to end the fight. He struck a series of precise blows to the purifier's nerve clusters, the same technique he had used on Gurren. The agent crumpled to the ground, paralyzed but conscious. "Tell your brothers I'm coming," Naruto whispered, before turning and sprinting down the hall, leaving the incapacitated zealot in his wake. He burst into the central cell block, a massive, multi-tiered rotunda, and was met with a scene from a nightmare. Dozens of guards and prisoners lay dead, their desiccated bodies littering the floor. In the center of the room, 3 more Shroud agents stood around a large, intricate seal they had drawn on the floor in what looked like ashen blood. The seal was beginning to pulse with a faint, black light, and the very air in the rotunda felt thin, as if the life was being sucked out of it. The remaining prisoners, hundreds of them, were locked in their cells, their faces pressed against the bars, expressions of pure terror on their faces as they felt their life force beginning to drain away. The 3 agents turned as Naruto entered. "The tumor," one of them hissed. "He is persistent. No matter. He is too late. The ritual has begun." "I'm not a big fan of rituals," Naruto roared, and this time, he didn't hold back. He knew he couldn't fight all 3 of them with taijutsu alone. He needed overwhelming power. He drew on the Kyuubi's chakra. A wave of ferocious, incandescent red energy erupted from him, his features twisting, his canines elongating, his eyes bleeding from violet to a burning, slitted red. A tail of pure chakra whipped out behind him, cracking the stone floor. He was no longer just the serpent's heir. He was the Jinchuriki of the 9-tailed fox, and he was filled with a righteous, incandescent rage. "Let's see if you can purify this," he bellowed, his voice a demonic roar. He formed a Rasengan in his hand. But it wasn't the standard blue sphere. It was crimson, crackling with the Kyuubi's malevolent power, a miniature sun of raw destruction. He launched himself at the Shroud agents. They raised their shields, but the sheer, overwhelming power of the Vermilion Rasengan was too much. The shields shattered, and the blast engulfed the nearest agent, who vaporized with a final, terrified shriek. The other 2 recoiled in shock, their fanaticism momentarily broken by the display of raw, godlike power. It was the opening Naruto needed. He moved between them, a blur of red energy. His chakra-formed claws tearing through their robes and their flesh. They tried to counter, to drain his life force, but it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The Kyuubi's chakra was too potent, too violent, actively burning them from the inside out when they tried to absorb it. The fight was over in seconds. It wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. Naruto stood panting in the center of the ruined seal. The red chakra slowly receding, though his eyes remained crimson. He ignored the terrified, awed stares of the prisoners. He had to finish the mission. He raced up the stairs to the control room, a small chamber overlooking the rotunda. He found the master seal, a complex array of scripts and channels carved into a large crystal. He didn't waste time trying to decipher it. He simply formed another Rasengan and shattered it into a million pieces. A wave of pure energy washed over the prison. In the cells below, the inmates gasped as they felt their own chakra, suppressed for so long, rush back into their bodies. A Kagaya clan member's bones began to protrude from his knuckles. A Yuki clan member's hands began to radiate a killing frost. Their power was back, and with it came their rage. The prison erupted. From the outside, a new sound joined the chaos, a bone-jarring, mind-bending shriek that sent the remaining guards clutching their heads in agony. Chiyuya had begun her symphony. Moments later, a deafening explosion rocked the entire island. From his vantage point, Naruto could see the western sea wall crumble inwards, a massive section of it collapsing into the ocean. Jirobo had opened the door. Naruto leapt down into the rotunda, landing amidst the now arming prisoners. "I am Naruto of Otogakure," he announced, his voice, still laced with the Kyuubi's power, booming through the chamber. "I have come to offer you freedom and revenge. Your exit is the western wall. Fight your way out, and a new life awaits you. A life where your power is celebrated, not condemned." His words, combined with the raw, intimidating power he radiated, had an immediate effect. The prisoners roared, a single, unified sound of defiance and hope. They turned their newfound power on their captors, and the prison break became a full-blown revolution. Naruto led the charge, a crimson comet tearing through the remaining Kurigakure forces. He guided the prisoners through the chaotic corridors, his team's actions having perfectly paved the way. Kidomaru's webs blocked reinforcements, Chiyuya's genjutsu sowed mass confusion, and Jirobo's breach was a massive, welcoming beacon of freedom. They spilled out onto the rocks, hundreds of the land of water's most powerful and dangerous shinobi, free and filled with a burning hatred for their Mizukage. Haku was waiting for them with a small fleet of stolen boats, her face a mask of stunned, overwhelming disbelief at the sight of the liberated army. As the last of the prisoners were evacuated, Naruto stood on the cliffs, looking back at the blood prison. It was burning, the sounds of battle still echoing from its depths. He had done it. He had succeeded in a mission that was deemed impossible. But the victory felt grim. He had come face to face with the Shroud's true purpose. They weren't just assassins. They were genocidal maniacs, intent on wiping out anyone they deemed impure. He had stopped them here. But the Purifier's words echoed in his mind. "My brothers are already at the central cells." They were organized. They were numerous. He had saved these people, but he had also painted an even larger target on his own back. He had declared himself the enemy of the Shroud, the protector of the very people they sought to destroy. Chiyuya came to stand beside him, her flute in her hand, her face smudged with dirt and exertion. "Well," she said, a tired but satisfied smirk on her face. "That was one hell of a jailbreak." "It's just the beginning," Naruto said, his red eyes fading back to their end. Ormal violet as he finally let the Kyuubi's chakra recede. He turned his gaze from the burning prison to the faces of the newly freed clans, their expressions a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a fierce, newfound loyalty. He hadn't just freed a group of prisoners. He had just raised an army. The war for the land of water had officially begun, and he was now at its center. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Rebels' Gambit. The island Haku had designated as the rebels' primary staging ground was a place of ghosts. It was the ancestral home of the Yuki clan, long since abandoned after the first of Kurigakure's purges years ago. The village was a collection of silent, snow-dusted pagodas and training halls, their paper walls torn and fluttering in the ceaseless, biting wind that whipped in from the sea. For the newly freed prisoners of the blood prison, it was a grim and fitting sanctuary, a place already dead, now teeming with those who had narrowly escaped the same fate. The mood was a volatile cocktail of euphoria and grief. Warriors of the Kagaya clan, their pale skin and stark markings a sign of their unique bloodline, tested their revived powers, their laughter sharp and brittle as they sparred, shattering frozen trees with bones they could now protrude from their bodies at will. Members of the Hazuka clan, masters of the hydrification technique, dissolved into puddles and reformed, reveling in a freedom that was as much elemental as it was physical. And among them, The Yuki clan survivors, led by Haku, moved with a quiet, sorrowful grace, home at last in a place that held nothing but memories. Naruto stood on the bluffs overlooking the village, the Sound Four arrayed behind him. He watched the chaotic, emotional scene, his face a mask of calm calculation. He had not freed a group of refugees. He had unleashed a force of nature. But a storm without direction was just senseless destruction. He needed to become its eye, to give it purpose and focus. "They're a mess," Chiyuya observed, her voice low, pulling the collar of her cloak tighter against the cold. "They're strong, no doubt. But they're not an army. They're a mob with good blood. An army is forged in fire," Naruto replied, his gaze unwavering. "We just need to build the furnace." His authority, for now, was absolute. He was the miracle worker who had shattered the blood prison, the mysterious powerhouse who had faced down the Mizukage's elite and walked away with their prize. His team, the Sound Four, were viewed with a mixture of awe and fear, their loyalty to him so complete that it was clear they were an extension of his will. But gratitude was a fleeting currency. He needed to convert it into something more durable: trust. He found the fledgling rebellion's leadership in the clan's main longhouse. The air was thick with the smell of pinewood smoke and the tension of a dozen competing agendas. Haku stood at his side as he entered, her presence a silent endorsement. At the head of a long, low table sat two figures who represented the core of the resistance. One was Mangetsu Hazuka, the elder brother of the infamous Suigetsu. He was lean and wiry, with the same sharp, shark-like teeth as his sibling, but his eyes held a keen, pragmatic intelligence that his more impulsive brother lacked. As the de facto military commander of the rebellion before Naruto's arrival, his word carried immense weight. The other was a man who radiated an aura of dangerous stillness. He was tall and gaunt, with long, white hair and two stark, red dots on his forehead. His face was a mask of aristocratic apathy, but his eyes, a piercing shade of green, missed nothing. This was Kimimaro Kagaya, the last direct heir of his clan, and arguably the most powerful individual freed from the blood prison. His bod, Y housed a terrifying Kekkei Genkei, the Shikatsunyaku, the ability to manipulate his own skeletal structure. He had been Yagura's most prized prisoner, and his loyalty, Naruto knew, would be the hardest to win. Naruto took his place at the table, not with arrogance, but with an assumption of command that was more powerful than any boast. He let the silence stretch, his violet eyes meeting those of every clan elder and squad leader in the room. The blood prison was a victory, Naruto began, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. It was a message to the Mizukage that his reign of terror is not absolute. But it was only the first sentence of the first chapter. Now, the real story begins. Mangetsu leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You have our gratitude, Naruto Dono. You and your master have given us a fighting chance. What are Lord Orochimaru's terms?" It was a practical question from a practical man. "My father's terms are simple," Naruto replied. "An alliance. Otogakure's resources in exchange for your loyalty once this war is won. But I am not here to talk about the future. I am here to talk about tomorrow." He looked directly at Kimimaro, who had remained perfectly, unnervingly still. "Your people are strong, but you are scattered, disorganized. You've been fighting a defensive war, a war of survival. Hiding in the shadows, striking at patrols, freeing a handful of prisoners here and there. That ends now. Survival is no longer the goal. The goal is conquest." A murmur went through the room. This was a radical shift in thinking. "We are outnumbered 10-1. A grizzled elder from a minor clan pointed out. "The Mizukage controls the navy, the major villages, the supply lines. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Only if you fight on his terms." Naruto countered smoothly. He gestured to a large map of the land of water that Haku had unrolled on the table. "Yagura's power is concentrated here, in the capital. His army is a blunt instrument. He uses it to crush any opposition that gathers in one place. So we won't gather. We will force him to scatter his forces. We will make him bleed from 1,000 cuts." His finger stabbed down on the map, landing on a heavily fortified island a few miles off the mainland. "This is the naval base at Shiohana. It's the primary depot for all weapons, food, and reinforcements heading to Yagura's armies on the front lines. It is the heart that pumps the blood of his war machine." It's also a fortress, second only to the blood prison, Mangetsu said, his brow furrowed. To take it would require a massive force. We are not going to take it, Naruto said, a predatory smile touching his lips. We are going to remove it. We will launch a simultaneous, multi-pronged assault. A squaw. D of Hazuka will sabotage the water gates, flooding the lower levels. The Kagaya will lead a frontal assault on the eastern barracks, a brutal, terrifying charge designed to draw the bulk of their forces. He looked around the room, his eyes alight with the fire of his strategy. While they are distracted by Flood and Bone, my team will infiltrate the command center and assassinate the commander. And Haku, your Yuki clan will create a wall of ice mirrors around the island's harbor, trapping their fleet and preventing any escape or reinforcement. We will strike hard, fast, and without mercy. We will not occupy the base. We will cripple it, burn their supplies, sink their ships, and vanish back into the mist before the capital even receives a distress call. The room was silent, the audacity of the plan sinking in. It was a classic Otogaker strategy, a swift, precise, and utterly ruthless strike designed to cause maximum chaos and damage. It was brilliant. It was also incredibly dangerous, asking each clan to perform a role that played to their strengths but also exposed them to immense risk. You ask my clan to be the vanguard, Kimimura's voice, soft and melodic, cut through the silence like a shard of glass. To be the sacrificial pawn that draws the enemy's attention. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his gaze was locked on Naruto, heavy and challenging. I have seen your power, Jinchuriki. The demon you hold inside you. It is formidable, but I will not send my people to die for the glory of Otogaker. The challenge had been issued. It wasn't a question of strength, but of trust. Naruto met Kimimura's gaze without flinching. I am not asking them to die for Otogaker. I am asking them to fight for the freedom of every Kagaya who will ever be born. This is not about glory. This is about momentum. Your clan is the fiercest in this rebellion. Your charge will not just be a diversion, it will be a terror tactic. It will break their morale. It will remind Kurigakure what it means to face the Kagaya in open battle. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more intense. You were in the blood prison longer than anyone. You know what Yagura does to your people. This is your chance to show him, to show all of them, that you are not victims to be caged. You are warriors to be feared. He paused. I will not command you from the rear. My team will be striking at the heart of the enemy. I am asking you to be the fist. I will be the dagger. We will strike as one. Kimimura's placid expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Naruto had not appealed to his duty as a subordinate, but to his pride as a Kagaya. He had offered him not a supporting role, but the starring one, the one that would etch the name of his clan back into the history of this nation with blood and fear. Very well, Kimimura said after a long, tense moment. My clan will be your fist. But if you falter, Jinchuriki, if your plan fails, my next dance will be with you. The threat was real, but the deal was struck. With Kimimura's assent, the other clans fell in line. The rebels' gambit, as it came to be known, was on. They spent the next few days in a flurry of preparation. Naruto moved through the camp like a phantom, his presence everywhere. He drilled the squads with Tayuya, using her genjutsu to simulate the chaos of battle. He worked with Anjutsu to plan the Hazuka's infiltration routes. He stood for an hour with Kimimura, not speaking, just watching the Kagaya warriors practice their deadly, beautiful taijutsu, their dance of the seedling fern. Earning a measure of silent respect from the stoic clan head. It was during one of these grueling days that a scout, one of Haku's, returned from the mainland, his face ashen, his body trembling. He brought news that threw a pall of horror over the entire camp. The town of Otonashi, a small fishing village known for quietly offering shelter to those with diluted bloodline traits, had been found, silent. A Kiri patrol had stumbled upon it to find every man, woman, and child dead. But their bodies weren't scattered by sword or jutsu. They were sitting in their homes, at their dinner tables, lying in their beds. Reduced to dried, gray husks. The shroud. Naruto assembled the leadership again, the scout's horrifying report hanging in the air. This is the enemy I warned you about, Naruto said, his voice grim. They are the ones backing Yagura. They are the ones who see you, all of you, as a disease to be cured. This is what they did in the blood prison before we arrived. This is their cleansing. Fear was a palpable thing in the longhouse now, a cold, creeping dread that overshadowed even their hatred for the Mizukage. Their war had just gained a second, more terrifying fr. Aunt against a foe who didn't fight for territory or power, but for their complete and utter annihilation. What are they? Haku asked, her voice barely a whisper, her usual composure shaken. They call themselves the Shroud of Jofuku. Naruto explained, finally sharing the name of their ghost-like enemy. They are zealots who believe chakra is a curse. Their goal is the eradication of all ninjutsu and kekkei genkai. They are why this mission, this war, is more than just a rebellion. We are fighting for our very right to exist. His words, meant to inform, had another effect. They galvanized the room. He had given their faceless, existential dread a name. He had defined the stakes not as a civil war, but as a war of extinction. And he had positioned himself as the only one who truly understood the nature of the threat. His leadership was no longer just accepted, it was becoming essential. Later that night, Naruto stood alone on the same bluff, the weight of his new army, of a two-front war, settling heavily on his shoulders. He was running through the final details of the Shiohana assault in his mind, checking every contingency, every possibility for failure. You're going to burn a hole in that cliff if you keep staring at it like that. He turned. Chiyuya stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, a rare look of genuine concern on her face. The biting sarcasm was gone, replaced by something quieter. Just making sure the plan is sound, he said, turning back to the sea. The plan is sound, she said, coming to stand beside him. It's a crazy, ballsy plan, but it's sound. That's not what's bothering you. He remained silent. It's them, isn't it? She pressed, her voice soft. The shroud, the walking dust bags. I fought 4 of them in the prison, he admitted, his voice low. I beat them, but there are more, and they're everywhere. They were in Otogakure. They're here. It's like fighting a plague. He clenched his fist. And now all these people, he gestured back at the village. Their lives depend on me knowing how to fight it. It was the closest he had ever come to admitting the pressure he felt, to showing a crack in his armor of absolute confidence. Chiyuya was quiet for a moment. Then, she reached out and roughly shoved his shoulder. So what? You scared? He looked at her, surprised. Good, she said, her voice regaining its familiar, abrasive edge. You should be. It means you're not an idiot. But don't you dare stand here and mope like some tragic hero. You're Naruto Uzumaki. You're the serpent's heir. You're the bastard who broke out of the blood prison and raised an army in a week. You figured out how to beat them before, you'll figure it out again. Her words were harsh, a typical Chiyuya-style pep talk, but beneath the insults was a current of unwavering, absolute faith in him. She wasn't coddling him, she was reminding him of who he was. He looked at her, at the fierce, defiant fire in her eyes, and the crushing weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. Thanks, I guess. Don't thank me, she grumbled, turning her face away to hide the faint blush that crept up her neck. Just don't get us all killed. Now come on. Jirobo saved some of that questionable fish stew from dinner. It's either that or Kitamaru's spider jerky. As she walked away, Naruto lingered for a moment longer. The path ahead was dark and fraught with peril. He was leading an army of desperate warriors against 2 terrifyingly powerful enemies, one of whom was a ghost that could be anywhere, anyone. The odds were impossible, the stakes were extinction, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was carrying that weight alone. He felt the trust of his army, the grudging respect of his rivals, and the fierce, unwavering loyalty of his team. And in the biting, lonely wind of the land of water, that was enough. The gambit was set. Now, it was time to play the hand. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A symphony of bone and ice. The mist over the sea was so thick it felt solid, a suffocating, gray wall that swallowed sound and light. It was a perfect cloak for an army of ghosts. 3 separate flotillas of small, muffled boats cut through the black water, their movements synchronized by a shared timeline and a desperate hope. On the lead boat of the central flotilla, Naruto stood at the prow, the salt spray cold on his face. His violet eyes fixed on the faint, hazy glow in the distance that was the Shiohana naval base. This was the linchpin, a fortress built to project the Mizukage's power. Tonight it would become his greatest vulnerability. Every warrior in their makeshift fleet knew the plan, knew their role. There was no room for error, no chance for retreat. This was not a battle. It was a surgical strike, and they were the scalpel. Positions, Naruto said, his voice low but carrying easily to his team. The boat slipped into the shadow of Shiohana's massive sea wall, a cliff of dark, barnacle-encrusted stone that rose into the fog. Mangetsu Hazuka and a small, elite squad of his clan slipped over the side of their own boat, their bodies dissolving into the churning water with barely a ripple. They were the first wave, the silent key that would unlock the fortress from within. Naruto watched them go, feeling their chakra signatures merge with the ocean itself, becoming undetectable. To the east, a larger group of boats was peeling off, their silhouettes vanishing into the mist. At their head was Kimimaro, standing impassively on the deck of his vessel, a bone-white specter against the gray gloom. He was the fist, the terrifying, beautiful distraction. His part in this symphony was to be the crashing crescendo of percussion that would draw all attention. To the west, Haku and the Yuki clan were taking their positions. A wide, sweeping arc that would encircle the harbor. They were the cage, the final, chilling note that would trap their prey. Our turn, Naruto murmured. Kitamura was already scaling the sea wall. His movements a silent, six-limbed scuttle. He secured a line, and the rest of them ascended into the heart of the enemy fortress. They landed on a deserted battlement, the air thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. Kitamura gave a series of sharp, clicking noises, his report on the patrol patterns. They were sloppy, confident in the fortress's natural defenses. It was the kind of arrogance Naruto had come to expect, and to exploit. "Tayuya, Jirobo, with me," Naruto commanded. "Kitamura, you know your job. The communications tower. Cut the head off the snake. No signals, no warnings." Kitamura's unsettling grin was his only reply as he vanished into the architecture of the base, a spider seeking the center of the web. They moved through the fortress like whispers, sticking to the shadows, their progress a testament to Orochimaru's grueling training. They were three ghosts in a city of soldiers, moving towards the central command tower, the fortress's brain. Deep within the bowels of the base, in the cavernous chambers of the water gates, Mangetsu and his team reformed from puddles on the floor, dispatching the handful of board guards with silent, liquid efficiency. They moved with a purpose that was both grim and exhilarating. This was their element. They placed explosive tags on the primary gears of the gate mechanisms, their movements precise. Their faces illuminated by the faint, pulsing blue light of the seals. On the eastern shore, Kimimaro's boat scraped against the sand. He stepped onto the beach, followed by 200 Kagaya warriors. They were a terrifying sight, their pale skin and clan markings stark in the gloom. They didn't shout. They didn't roar. They simply drew their bone blades, extended spikes from their knuckles, and waited. Kimimaro raised a single hand, his long, white hair lifting in the sea breeze. The first signal came not as a sound, but as a feeling. A deep, subterranean groan that vibrated through the stone beneath Naruto's feet. Mangetsu. The explosions were perfectly timed, a series of muffled concussions that ripped through the base's foundations. Alarms began to blare, their strident, panicked cry cutting through the night. A torrent of seawater, unleashed from the sabotaged gates, began to roar into the lower levels. The second signal came a moment later. A wave of raw, unadulterated killing intent washed over the island from the east, so potent it was like a physical blow. Kimimaro had begun his attack. Naruto, Tayuya, and Jirobo watched from a rooftop overlooking the main courtyard. The eastern barracks erupted in chaos. The Kagaya fell upon the Kiri garrison not like soldiers, but like a natural disaster. Kimimaro was at their head, and he was not fighting, he was dancing. His dance of the larch was a fluid, mesmerizing ballet of death, his body a whirlwind of razor-sharp bones. He flowed through the Kiri ranks, and men fell before him, impaled, dismembered, ire armor and jutsu useless against the onslaught of his peerless Kekkei Genkai. The Kagaya were a force of pure, terrifying aggression, and the panicked Kiri shinobi, their lower levels flooding and their chain of command in chaos, broke before them. "He's drawing their attention," Jirobo rumbled, stating the obvious. He's putting on a show, Yuya corrected, a note of awe in her voice. And it's a damn good one. As expected, reinforcements began pouring from the central parts of the base towards the eastern barracks, desperate to stem the tide of bone and fury. It was the opening Naruto had been waiting for. The third signal was the most spectacular of all. A great, shimmering wall of ice suddenly erupted from the sea, encircling the entire harbor. It grew with impossible speed, a cathedral of frozen water that trapped the Kiri naval fleet in a glittering, inescapable prison. Haku's jutsu was a masterpiece of power and control, a declaration that no one was leaving Shiohama tonight. Now, Naruto said, they moved. Jirobo, no longer needing stealth, became a battering ram of flesh and stone. He smashed through the main doors of the command tower, the reinforced steel screaming in protest. Chiyuya was right behind him. Her flute to her lips. She didn't play a genjutsu to induce fear, she played a disorienting, high-frequency melody that attacked the inner ear, causing vertigo and nausea. The elite guards inside the tower stumbled, their vision swimming, their aim thrown off. Naruto was a blur of black and gray that shot past them. He ignored the disoriented guards, leaving them for his teammates. His target was the top floor, the commander's office. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his movements silent and deadly. 2 guards at the top of the stairwell tried to intercept him. A flick of his wrist, and 2 wind-infused senbon lodged in their throats. They fell without a sound. He kicked open the heavy doors to the commander's office. The room was opulent, a stark contrast to the rest of the utilitarian fortress. Maps covered a large table, and a grizzled man with the bearing of a veteran stood behind it, a massive, cleaver-like sword already in his hands. E-man's face was crisscrossed with scars, and his eyes held not fear, but a cold, hard fury. So the rats have a leader, the commander growled. His name was Jinsuke, one of Yagura's most trusted and ruthless officers. Every rebellion needs a figurehead, Naruto replied, falling into a combat stance. And every fortress needs to fall. Jinsuke was fast, his massive blade whistling through the air with deceptive speed. Naruto met him head-on, their clash a blur of motion. It was a classic confrontation. The commander's brute strength and experience versus Naruto's fluid speed and unpredictable tactics. Naruto used the room to his advantage, kicking off the walls, using shadow clones to feint and probe for weaknesses. Jinsuke was good. He cut through the clones with contemptuous ease, his blade cleaving the desk in 2 as he pressed his attack. But he was fighting a conventional battle against an unconventional opponent. Naruto dropped low, sliding under a wide swing, and formed a Rasengan in his palm. He drove it upwards, not at Jinsuke's body, but at the floor beneath his feet. The floor exploded, and Jinsuke, his footing gone, stumbled for a critical half-second. It was all Naruto needed. He was behind the man in an instant, a kunai pressed to his throat. It's over. Jinsuke let out a ragged, defeated laugh. Go ahead, boy, kill me, but you haven't won. You have no idea what you're fighting. His eyes had a strange, fanatic gleam to them. The Mizukage is just a vessel, a tool for the great cleansing to come. The world will be purified of your kind. Naruto's blood ran cold. Cleansing, purified. It was the shroud's rhetoric. He pressed the blade harder. What do you know of the shroud of Jofuku? Jinsuke just smiled, a bloody, triumphant expression on his face. They are the future, he choked out. Naruto didn't hesitate. He ended it. The commander fell, his massive sword clattering on the ruined floor. The head of the snake was dead, but his victory was ashes in his mouth. Jinsuke wasn't just a Kiri officer. He was one of them. The shroud's influence ran deeper than he could have ever imagined. It had reached the very top of Yagura's military command. He quickly searched the office. He found what he was looking for tucked away in a locked drawer, a series of coded dispatches. They weren't from the Mizukage. The seal at the bottom of the scrolls was a simple, elegant black moth. The dispatches detailed the movements of rebel forces, the locations of suspected bloodline sympathizers, and one, in particular, made his breath catch in his throat. It was a report on the village of Otonashi, praising the efficiency of the purifiers, and referring to the massacre as a successful field test of the abnegation seal. This wasn't just a military base. It as a forward operating post for the Shroud, hidden within Yagura's army. A high-pitched whistle, the signal from Tayuya, broke him from his horrified trance. The lower levels were secure. It was time to go. Naruto grabbed the dispatches, sealing them in a scroll. This was proof, tangible evidence of the conspiracy he now faced. He set the office ablaze with a simple fire jutsu, the flames catching quickly on the maps and wooden furniture. A pillar of smoke rising from the command tower was the final signal. The mission was complete. The withdrawal was as disciplined and brutal as the attack. The Kagaya, their purpose served, disengaged, melting back into the mist as quickly as they had appeared, leaving a field of carnage in their wake. The Hazuka slipped back into the flooding tunnels and out into the open sea. Haku held the wall of ice just long enough for the last of the rebel forces to retreat, before letting it collapse back into the ocean with a deafening groan. From the relative safety of their boats, they watched Shiohana burn. The fortress was a scene of utter chaos, its lower levels flooded, its fleet trapped and now being systematically sunk by the Yuki clan, its command structure decapitated, and its main garrison shattered. They had cut the heart out of Yagura's war machine. The return to the Yuki village was triumphant. The news of their impossible victory spread like wildfire, and the morale of the rebel army soared. They had gone from a scattered band of survivors to a force that could cripple one of the Mizukage's greatest strongholds. Naruto was no longer just an ally, he was a legend. The architect of their first great hope. That night, in the longhouse, the atmosphere was electric. But when Naruto met with the rebel leadership, his expression was grim. He laid the captured shroud dispatches on the table. "We were successful," he said, his voice silencing the room. "Shiohana is crippled." But the battle revealed a darker truth. He explained what he had found. What the commander had said. "We are not fighting the Mizukage's army. We are fighting an army that has been infected by the Shroud's ideology from the top down. Yagura may be the face of this war, but they are the brain." Mangetsu picked up one of the scrolls, his face hardening as he recognized the names of Kiri villages marked for observation. Haku stared at the report on Otonashi, her hands trembling slightly. Kimimaro, however, looked at Naruto, his green eyes holding a new, profound level of respect. "You knew," he stated, his voice soft. "You knew of this enemy before you came to us." "I knew they existed," Naruto confirmed. "I did not know how deep their roots in this country had grown." The victory suddenly felt different. It was still a victory, but it was not the decisive blow they had imagined. They hadn't just wounded a beast, they had exposed a cancer. A cancer that was far more widespread than they had feared. "This changes everything," Haku said, her voice heavy. "How can we fight an enemy who wears the face of our countrymen?" "We fight smarter," Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his new allies, his voice filled with a hard-won, unshakable authority. "We fight dirtier. We just dealt them a massive blow and stole their intelligence. They are wounded, and they are exposed. Now, we use their own fanaticism against them. Now, we go hunting." He looked down at the map. No longer just a commander planning a rebellion, but a hunter who had finally gotten the scent of his true prey. The symphony of bone and ice was over, but a new, quieter, and far more deadly composition was about to begin. The hunt for the Shroud of Jofuku had truly started. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heretic's Lab. The victory at Shiohana was a fire that warmed the rebellion, but the captured dispatches were a chilling wind that threatened to extinguish it. In the longhouse, the mood of triumph had been replaced by a grim, focused intensity. The map of the land of water was no longer just a diagram of military targets, it was a web, and they were only just beginning to see the spider at its center. Haku, her slender fingers tracing the complex characters of the Shroud's coded messages, was their key. Her training in Kurigakure's Anbu division had included a deep dive into historical ciphers, a skill she never thought she would use to hunt an enemy far older than her own village. "It's a substitution cipher, but a layered one," she murmured, her breath misting in the cold air of the hall. "It's based on ancient monastic scripts." Arrogant, she looked up at Naruto, her icy eyes holding a new, burning light. "I've broken it." She pointed to a location on the mainland coast, a remote, sparsely populated peninsula known for its treacherous cliffs and perpetually stormy weather. "They don't call it by a name. It's a symbol, a kiln, a place where things are purified by fire." Her finger tapped the map. There was an old monastery there, abandoned for centuries. The scrolls refer to it as the primary research and development site for the abnegation seal. The name sent a shiver through the room. It was the weapon the Shroud had used to massacre the village of Otonashi. The ritual they had attempted to enact in the blood prison. They're trying to refine it, Naruto stated, his mind connecting the pieces. To make it more efficient. A weapon they can deploy on a larger scale. According to these dispatches, their lead researcher is an elder named Amachi, Haku continued. He is not a warrior, but a scholar of their heretical doctrine. He believes the life force of Kekkei Genkai users is the perfect fuel to power the seal. The implication was horrifying. They weren't just killing their prisoners, they were using them as batteries for their doomsday weapon. We will destroy this kiln, Kimimaro said, his voice a soft, deadly promise. His hand rested on the hilt of a bone sword he had formed from his own body. My CL, and will tear it from the cliffs and cast it into the sea. No, Naruto countered, his authority silencing the Kagaya's quiet rage. A frontal assault is what they'll expect. This place is not a fortress, it's a laboratory. It requires precision, not brute force. He looked around the table at the faces of his allies, the leaders of an army he had unwittingly forged. Kimimaro, Mangetsu, I need you here. Use the momentum from Shiohana. Launch diversionary raids along the coast. Make Yagura's forces believe we are preparing for a major offensive near the capital. Draw their eyes away from the peninsula. He then turned to his own team, who stood behind him, silent and ready. This is a mission for my team. We will infiltrate the lab, secure Amachi's research, rescue any prisoners we can, and then we will erase the facility from the face of the earth. There were no arguments. His strategic acumen had been proven. His word was now law. Their journey back to the mainland was under the COV. Of a storm that seemed summoned by the land's own misery. The small boat pitched and rolled, but the Sound Four were unfazed. This was their natural element, moving through chaos towards a singular, violent purpose. The monastery was a scar carved into the face of a towering cliff, accessible only by a crumbling, windswept staircase that the sea was slowly reclaiming. To ascend it would be suicide. A place for monks who really wanted to be left alone, Yuya commented, shielding her eyes from the stinging rain. The front door is too loud, Naruto said. Kitamura. The spider shinobi needed no further instruction. He scaled the slick, vertical cliff face as if it were flat ground, a single, near-invisible thread of his toughest silk trailing behind him. They ascended into the storm, the waves crashing 100 feet below. The wind threatening to rip them from their precarious handholds. At the top, they found not a serene place of worship, but a fortified compound. The monastery's ancient, weathered stone was augmented with new, cruelly sharp iron fences and discreetly placed surveillance seals. But there was a weakness. There was always a weakness. The sound, Yuya whispered, her head cocked. Her eyes closed in concentration. The wind howling through these cliffs, it creates a constant, low-frequency drone. They're using it to mask the sounds from inside the lab. But it also creates dead zones. Pockets of near silence where their audio sensors are useless. She guided them, her senses a map in the roaring darkness. They moved through the compound like phantoms. Their steps perfectly timed to the rhythm of the storm. They found a ventilation shaft, its iron grill corroded by the salt air. Jirobo, with a single, controlled application of his immense strength, bent the bars without a sound. They were in. The air inside was sterile, cold, and smelled faintly of ozone and decay. It was the same scent Naruto remembered from Orochimaru's labs, but this place felt different. His father's laboratories were places of twisted, passionate science. This place was a temple to a cold, dispassionate ideology of death. They moved through silent, white corridors, the only sound the hum of machinery. The first sign of the horror within was a row of observation windows looking into small, sterile cells. Inside each cell was a shinobi, floating in a tank of clear fluid, wires and strange black metallic nodes attached to their bodies. Some were Kiri shinobi, others were clearly from other lands, judging by their clothing and headbands. They were the Shroud's test subjects. They were all dead, but their bodies were in a state of perfect preservation, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. There, cataloging them, Yuya breathed, her voice tight with disgust. Studying how the seal affects different types of chakra. Naruto's face was a mask of cold fury. He pressed on, his hand gesturing for them to follow. They reached a larger chamber, a Centra-L laboratory that was a nightmare of science and blasphemy. In the center of the room was a massive, pulsating sphere of black energy, contained within a complex array of crystals and seals. It was the abnegation seal, a weaponized, stable version of the ritual they had disrupted in the blood prison. Wires snaked from the sphere to a dozen more tanks, these containing living prisoners. Their bodies convulsed weakly, their life force being visibly siphoned away to feed the sphere, their chakra a flickering candle in a hurricane. Standing before a console, his back to them, was a tall, slender man in the simple, elegant robes of a shroud elder. He was observing the readings with the detached air of a scholar examining a rare text. This was Elder Amachi. "The energy output is stabilizing," Amachi said to a subordinate, his voice calm and academic. "The Kagaya specimen provides a remarkable amplification. Their unique life force is a key. A pity there are so few of them left." Naruto's team fanned out, taking positions in the shadows of the humming machinery. This was the moment. "A pity for you, you mean?" Naruto's voice cut through the lab's sterile hum. Amachi turned, his movements unhurried. He was older, with fine, silver hair and a handsome, scholarly face. His eyes, however, held a chilling lack of any emotion. They were the eyes of a man who saw living beings as nothing more than data points. He looked at Naruto not with surprise, but with a flicker of mild, clinical interest. "Ah," he said, a faint, condescending smile on his lips. "The primary tumor, the Uzumaki Jinchuriki. Your life force signature is extraordinary. A chaotic, beautiful symphony of the very corruption we seek to excise. To be able to study you up close is a rare privilege." He showed no fear. He simply made a subtle gesture with his hand. From the shadows, his elite guards emerged. They were purifiers, like the ones from the blood prison, but they were different. Their robes were sleeker, and they were armed with strange, staff-like weapons that crackled with the same black, life-draining energy as the seal. "You're Orochimaru's creature, are you not?" Amachi continued, his tone conversational, as if he were giving a lecture. "He seeks to become a god by collecting and mastering all jutsu. A fool's errand. He is merely collecting different forms of the same disease. We are the true gods. The ones who will administer the cure." "You call this a cure?" Naruto growled, gesturing to the prisoners in the tanks. "A necessary sacrifice," Amachi replied without hesitation. "To heal a body, one must cut out the cancer. You are the cancer, and this," he gestured to the pulsating sphere, "is the scalpel that will save the world." The battle began without another word. The Sound Four engaged the elite purifiers, and the lab erupted into a storm of silent, deadly energy. Jirobo's earth-shattering punches were met by energy shields that buckled and cracked. Kidomaru's webs were disintegrated mid-air by blasts from the purifiers' staves. Chiyuya's genjutsu was their most effective weapon, the sound waves disrupting the purifiers' concentration, causing their control over the unstable energy to flicker. Naruto went for Amachi. The elder was, as Haku had said, no warrior. He fought defensively, using a series of strange, intricate seals drawn on talismans that created temporary barriers and bursts of concussive force. His goal was not to defeat Naruto, but to delay him. "My guards will handle your pets," Amachi said calmly, dodging a swipe from Naruto's claws. "And you are merely a distraction from my true purpose." He began to weave a complex series of hand signs, not for a jutsu, but to interface with the main console. "I will simply accelerate the process. This facility has served its purpose. It is time for its final, glorious act." Warning lights began to flash on the console. The black sphere in the center of the room began to spin faster, its hum rising to an unbearable pitch. "He's going to overload it." Chiyuya screamed over the din of battle, having dispatched her opponent with a point-blank sonic blast. "He's going to detonate the whole damn lab." Naruto realized Amachi's plan. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to take them all with him, to turn his lab into a bomb of pure life-annihilating energy that would scour the entire peninsula clean. There was no time for a subtle approach. Naruto roared, the raw, untamed power of the 9 tails erupting from him in a cloak of burning red chakra. One tail of pure energy lashed out, smashing the console into pieces. Amachi was thrown back, his calm demeanor finally breaking as he stared at the unrestrained power of the Jinchuriki. Magnificent, he breathed, a fanatic's ecstasy on his face even as the overload sequence. Now unstoppable, continued. This is the glorious end. The purification by fire. Naruto ignored him. The sphere was glowing white-hot now, cracks of black lightning arcing across its surface. Destroying it with a Rasengan would only make the explosion worse. He had to contain it. Or neutralize it. He looked at the tanks, at the prisoners being used as a power source. That was the key. He had to sever the connection. He formed 4 shadow clones, their bodies already cloaked in the Kyuubi's power. Jirobo. The ceiling. Kitamura. Chiyuya, get the prisoners you can and get out. Naruto commanded, his voice a demonic roar. His clones leapt to the tanks, their chakra-shrouded hands plunging into the machinery, tearing out the cables that fed the seal. As each cable was severed, the prisoners slumped, their life force no longer being drained. The sphere flickered, its power source cut, but the overload was still building. Naruto, the real Naruto, flashed through a series of hand signs Orochimaru had taught him, a forbidden sealing jutsu designed to contain unstable energy. It was risky, and it required a massive amount of chakra. A swirling vortex of seals appeared on his palm. He leapt onto the containment unit, the heat scorching his clothes, and slammed his hand onto the core. Seal, he bellowed. The energy of the imploding sphere rushed into the vortex on his palm. The force of it throwing him back across the room. For a moment, a perfect, silent black hole seemed to form where the seal had been, before it winked out of existence. The immediate threat was over. As the dust settled, Jirobo brought his fists down on a primary support column. The whole place is coming down, he yelled. The lab began to shake violently. Amachi lay on the floor, impaled by a piece of his own shattered machinery, a look of ecstatic horror on his dead face. Chiyuya and Kitamura had managed to free 2 of the prisoners who were still breathing, slinging them over their shoulders. They escaped through the tunnels. Jirobo smashed through the rock, the entire monastery collapsing into the sea behind them in a final, thunderous roar. They emerged onto a lower cliff. Face just as their former entry point was consumed by the avalanche of stone and iron. They stood in the driving rain, panting, bruised, and victorious. They had destroyed the heretic's lab and its monstrous creator. They had stolen his research and crippled the Shroud's primary weapon development program. Naruto looked at the 2 rescued prisoners. They were unconscious, their bodies emaciated, their chakra coils shredded. They had survived, but their lives as shinobi were over. It was a grim, hollow victory. He looked at his hands. The sealing formula had faded, but his palm was scorched black, the skin smoking. The pain was immense, but the Kyuubi's chakra was already working, slowly, painfully knitting the flesh back together. Chiyuya came to his side, her usual abrasive manner completely gone. She looked from his burned hand to his face, her expression unreadable in the stormy darkness. She said nothing. She didn't need to. In the shared silence, surrounded by the wreckage of their enemy's ambition, a new, unspoken understanding passed between them. They had walked through hell together, and had come out the other side. Let's go home, Naruto said, his voice raw. The hunt was over, for now. But the image of the lab, of the prisoners in their tanks, of Amachi's ecstatic, dying face, would be burned into his mind forever. He had learned the true face of his enemy. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Mizukage's Ghost. The air in the Yuki longhouse was thick with the scent of melted snow and burning pinewood. A fragile warmth against the endless, biting cold. Victory had a strange taste. The destruction of the Shroud's laboratory was a monumental blow against their hidden enemy, but the rescued Priso Ners were a testament to the price of that victory. Only one of the 2, a man from a minor clan whose name no one knew, had clung to life long enough to be brought back to the rebel base. He lay on a cot, his body little more than a skeleton draped in skin, his chakra coils shattered beyond repair. Naruto and Chiyuya stood over him, Haku at their side, her medical ninjutsu a gentle, green glowed. Chi could ease his pain but do nothing to mend the ruin of his body. The man's eyes, clouded with the haze of his impending death, focused on Naruto. A flicker of terrified recognition sparked within them. "The vessel," he rasped, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "The blight, and the cure." "Easy," Haku murmured, trying to calm him. But the man grabbed Naruto's wrist with a strength that belied his withered frame. His eyes were wide, staring at something only he could see. "Beware the mouthpiece. He walks in the shadow of the Mizukage's ghost, he speaks with the voice of the coming purity." His grip slackened, his head fell back, the last breath sighed from his lips, and he was gone. Silence descended on the room, heavy and absolute. "The Mizukage's ghost," Chiyuya repeated, her voice a low murmur. "What the hell does that mean?" Quote, "It means our enemy is closer to the throne than we thought," Naruto said, his gaze distant. His hand, now a latticework of angry red scars from the sealing jutsu, clenched into a fist. The pain was a dull, constant throb, a physical reminder of the shroud's touch. Later, as the grim task of dealing with the dead was underway, Chiyuya found Naruto alone in a disused training hall. He was methodically wrapping his burned hand with fresh bandages, his movements precise and detached. She came to him without a word, took the roll of linen from his uninjured hand, and began to dress the wound herself. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her usual abrasive energy replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. He didn't pull away. He watched her, the way her pink hair fell across her face. The fierce concentration in her brown eyes. They stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft rasp of the bandages. "The prisoner's words, they spooked you," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She secured the bandage with a neat knot. "I'm a Jinchuriki," he replied, his voice low. "Yagura is a Jinchuriki. This man we just fought, Amachi, he tall. Head about the Kagaya specimen being a he. The prisoner called me a vessel. The shroud isn't just killing people with Kekkei Genkai. They're using them, and they have a special interest in us." She finished her work and looked up, her hands still resting on his. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then we'll show them what this vessel can do. We'll show them what happens when they hunt a monster that bites back." The raw, unconditional belief in her eyes was a shield against the creeping dread. She wasn't afraid of the Kyuubi, of what he was. She saw it as just another weapon in his arsenal, in their arsenal. He looked down at her hands on his, then back to her face. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a current of shared resolve that was more intimate than any touch, more binding than any words. The war council that followed was charged with this new, grim energy. The captured research from Amachi's lab was spread across the table, a chilling testament to the shroud's genius and depravity. Haku, her face pale, delivered her findings. "It's worse than we imagined," she said, her voice tight. "The abnegation seal is only one part of a larger project. They call it the Ark of Purity. It's a global-scale ritual. They believe that by creating a resonant cascade using the life force of enough powerful Kekkei Genkai users, they can create a wave that will permanently veer the connection to chakra for every living being on the planet." She paused, letting the apocalyptic scale of their ambition sink in. "They've been building a network of conduits for years, hidden in places of natural energy. The lab on the peninsula was just one. The final component they need is what they call a perfected host. A Jinchuriki whose Biju has been completely subjugated." A. Lee. Ving focused to amplify and direct the final wave. All eyes in the room turned to Naruto. The prisoner's warning, Haku's discovery, it all painted a horrifying picture. "Yagura," Naruto stated, the pieces clicking into place. "He's the Mizukage, and the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. He's their perfected host. Then we must strike Kurigakure now." Mangetsu Hazuka urged, slamming his fist on the table. "We must kill Yagura before they can enact this ritual. A full-scale invasion of the capital would be a bloodbath," Kimimaro countered, his voice calm but his green eyes cold. "Even in their weakened state, the Kiri Anbu are formidable. We would lose half our forces just breaching the walls." They began to argue, the pragmatic military commander and the proud clan leader, their voices rising in the smoky hall. This was the moment Naruto had been waiting for. This was the moment a leader was needed. "You're both wrong," he said, his voice cutting through the debate like a blade. All eyes snapped to him. "You're still thinking like soldiers," he continued, his gaze sweeping over them. "You're thinking of how to destroy an army. But we are not fighting an army. We are fighting an idea. A disease. And you don't cure a disease by punching it. You cure it by turning its own body against it." He walked to the head of the table, to the map of the land of water. He was no longer just a participant in this council. He was its center of gravity. Ygurra's power, and the Shroud's by extension, comes from the absolute loyalty and terror he inspires. The purges have made every shinobi in Kiri paranoid. They fear their own blood. Their own neighbors. We are going to use that paranoia. We are going to take this weapon of fear and aim it directly back at the Mizukage's heart. He unsealed the scroll containing the Shroud dispatches he'd taken from Shiohana. We have their codes. We have their intelligence. And we have the names of several of Ygurra's top commanders who are Shroud sympathizers. We are going to add a few more names to that list. A slow, dawning comprehension spread across the faces of the rebel leaders. We will forge new dispatches, Naruto elaborated, a chillingly brilliant, utterly ruthless plan forming in his mind. We will implicate some of Ygurra's most loyal, most powerful, and most pure-blooded commanders as traitors. We will make it look like they are conspiring with us, that they are part of the Shroud's network. We will leak these forgeries through Haku's agents. We will plant rumors. We will create a ghost of betrayal inside the Mizukage's own inner circle. It was a plan born of pure psychological warfare, a strategy Orochimaru would have applauded for its elegant cruelty. He was proposing to destroy Kirigakure's entire command structure without firing a single shot. To make the Mizukage the architect of his own army's destruction. Some of those men. They are patriots, Haku said quietly, her face troubled. They may be our enemies, but they are not traitors. This is a war for survival, Haku, Naruto said, his voice hard but not unkind. Their innocence is a luxury we cannot afford. Better their lives are lost in Ygurra's paranoia. De-purged than our warriors' lives are lost on the walls of their city. The sheer, cold-blooded pragmatism of it was staggering. This was the serpent's heir, wielding deception as a weapon as deadly as any Rasengan. After a long, tense silence, Mangetsu gave a slow nod. Kimamaro's lips curved into a faint, appreciative smile. They were warriors, and they understood. Victory, absolute and efficient, was the only morality that mattered now. The next few weeks were a masterclass in espionage. Naruto's shadow clones, carrying the meticulously forged documents, slipped across the land of water like the mist itself. Haku's network of spies, emboldened by their new purpose, became the carriers of whispers, planting seeds of doubt in taverns, barracks, and the halls of power. The effect was catastrophic and immediate. Ygurra, already driven to extremes by his Shroud handlers, received the proof of a grand conspiracy within his ranks. He lashed out with the fury of a cornered animal. Arrests began. An elite commander was executed after a sham trial. 2 entire Anbu squads, famed for their loyalty, were imprisoned. Kirigakure began to devour itself. The flow of troops to the front lines said as the capital became a vortex of suspicion and summary executions. The time to strike was now. But Naruto's target wasn't the Kiri army. It was the head of the serpent. Kimamaro, Mangetsu, he commanded in the final war council. Take our main force. Create a diversion at the western bridge. A major assault. Draw what's left of their loyal Anbu forces out of the city. I want every eye in Kirigakure looking west. And you? Kimamaro asked. The Mizukage's ghost is waiting for me, Naruto replied. I'm going into the tower. But this isn't a mission for an army. It's an exorcism. He looked to his team. Jirobo, Kitamaru, you're with the main force. Add your strength to theirs. Make the diversion look real. He turned to the last member of his team. Chiyuya, you're with me. A mission into the heart of the enemy's power. With only the 2 of them. It was the ultimate test of their trust, their synergy. She didn't even blink. She just gave him a sharp, confident grin. As the sounds of battle erupted to the west. A furious, chaotic symphony orchestrated by Kimamaro's Kagaya and Jirobo's earth-shattering power, Kirigakure's attention shifted. In that moment of distraction, 2 shadows slipped through the city's canals. Moving towards the impossibly tall, cylindrical spire that was the Mizukage's tower. The tower was a fortress within a fortress, but the internal purges had thrown its security into disarray. Guards eyed each other with suspicion, their patrol routes disrupted. Naruto and Tayuya moved through the chaos, a synchronized dance of stealth and misdirection. A silent takedown here, a sound-based genjutsu there to make a patrol turn left instead of right. They were a perfect team, anticipating each other's moves, her senses and his speed creating a seamless infiltration. They bypassed the throne room. It was empty, a symbol of a power that was no longer centered there. Naruto, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain, the faint, twisted resonance between High's seal and Yagura's, found a hidden passage behind the throne. It led down, deep into the tower's foundations, into a chamber that felt ancient and wrong. The room was circular, the walls covered in the shroud's disturbing non-chakra-based seals. The air was cold and heavy, like a tomb. In the center of the room, kneeling before a simple, black stone altar, was Yagura, the fourth Mizukage. He was small in stature, almost childlike. But the chakra radiating from him was immense, monstrous. He was the perfected host. And standing beside him, a hand resting on his shoulder, was a man in the simple, gray robes of a shroud elder. He was unremarkable, with a kind, grandfatherly face and gentle eyes. He was the mouthpiece. "I have been expecting you, Naruto Uzumaki," the elder said, his voice soft and resonant, filled with a disarming warmth. It was inevitable that the greatest of the blights would be drawn to the vessel of our salvation. Yagura's head snapped up. His eyes were empty, glassy. But they fixed on Naruto with a terrifying, predatory focus. "What have you done to him?" Naruto demanded, his hand moving towards his kunai pouch. "We have given him purpose," the mouthpiece replied calmly. "His power was a chaotic, destructive force, a cancer. We have simply focused it, guided it. We have turned the world's greatest poison into its most potent cure." He smiled, a beatific, chilling expression. "Just as we can do for you. The Nine Tails is so much stronger than this pathetic turtle. Imagine the good you could do, the purity you could bring to the world, under our guidance." "I've heard your sales pitch," Naruto snarled. "I'm not interested." "A pity," the elder sighed. He tightened his grip on Yagura's shoulder. "Then your purification will have to be a more traditional one." Yagura shot to his feet, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. A cloak of bubbling, crimson chakra, the version 2 form of a Jinchuriki, erupted around him. Coral grew at an explosive rate from the floor, trying to impale them. The battle had begun. Yagura was a terrifying opponent. He moved with a speed and power that matched Naruto's own Kyuubi-enhanced state. He wielded his Biju's power with a cold, terrifying precision, creating massive water projectiles and mirrors of ice. He was a puppet, but a brutally effective one. Naruto met him head-on, a blur of red chakra against red chakra. Their fight was a maelstrom of destructive energy that tore the chamber apart. But Naruto could feel the elder's influence, a subtle, insidious pressure on his own seal, trying to pry open the cage. To turn his controlled power into a mindless rage. "Don't let him get in your head, pretty boy." Tayuya's voice cut through the chaos. She wasn't fighting Yagura. Her target was the mouthpiece. But she wasn't attacking him physically. She stood her ground, her flute to her lips, and began to play. It was not a melody of illusion or pain. It was a complex, layered wave of pure sound, a series of resonating frequencies. She was playing a counter-melody to the elder's control. The mouthpiece's calm expression finally broke. He grimaced, clutching the side of his head. "What is this noise? This discord? It's called rock and roll, you old bastard," she screamed, pouring all of her chakra, all of her will, into her music. The pressure on Naruto's seal lessened. He could think clearly again. He saw Yagura not as a monster, but as a prisoner in his own body. He saw the flicker of the real Mizukage's soul, buried deep beneath the shroud's control. There was no saving him. There was only mercy. Naruto pushed the Kyuubi's power to its limit, forming a massive, spiraling vermilion Rasengan. He broke through Yagura's defenses, his attack not aimed at the Mizukage's heart, but at the seal on his chest. "Be free," Naruto whispered. The impact was immense. The shroud's control, already weakened by Tayuya's sonic assault, shattered. For a single, fleeting moment, Yagura's eyes cleared. He looked at Naruto. A flicker of gratitude, of understanding, in their depths. Then, he and the 3 tails within him were consumed by the raw power of the 9 tails. With Yagura's death, the mouthpiece screamed, not in pain, but in frustration, as his greatest asset turned to dust. The link was broken. His plan was in ruins. He turned to flee, but Tayuya's music shifted, a single, sharp knot. That caused the stone at his feet to crack, making him stumble. Naruto was on him in an instant, a kunai to his throat. It's over. The elder looked at him, his gentle eyes now filled with a burning, fanatic hatred. This changes nothing. You are only delaying the inevitable. Jofuku's return is at hand. The arc is already prepared. Before Naruto could demand more, the elder's body began to glow with a sickly, black light. We will all be purified, he shrieked. Naruto leapt back, pulling Tayuya with him, just as the mouthpiece's body dissolved, not into dust, but into a wave of annihility. Energy that scoured the chamber clean, leaving nothing behind. They stood in the ruined, silent heart of the tower, panting, surrounded by the ghosts of their enemies. They had won. The aftermath was swift. With Yagura dead and the shroud's influence shattered, what was left of Kurigaku's command structure collapsed completely. The rebel army marched into the capital not as conquerors, but as liberators. Restoring order to a village that had been tearing itself apart. Mangetsu Hazuka, with the backing of the clans, was named acting Mizukage, with Haku as his chief advisor. A new era for the Land of Water had begun. Days later, Naruto stood on the highest balcony of the tower, looking out at the rising sun. The mist that had perpetually choked this land seemed thinner now, the light brighter. He had won a war. He had saved a nation. He had fulfilled his father's mission and then some. Tayuya came to stand beside him. The adrenaline of their battles had faded, leaving a shared bone. Deep exhaustion and an unbreakable bond forged in fire and shadow. He looked at his scarred hand, a permanent reminder of this campaign. Then he looked at her. The time for banter, for rivalry, for unspoken things, was over. I couldn't have done it without you, Tayuya, he said, his voice quiet, sincere. Your music, you saved me back there. She looked away, out at the horizon, a faint blush on her cheeks. Don't get used to it, she grumbled, but there was no heat in it. She nudged his shoulder with her own. Besides, someone has to watch your back. You're a reckless idiot. He smiled, a real smile. He was the serpent's heir. The Jinchuriki of the 9 tails, the hero of the mist, and the shroud's most wanted. He was a leader, a killer, and a strategist. He had an army loyal to him, a nation indebted to him. And the knowledge of a coming apocalypse that threatened to consume the world. The future was a terrifying, unknown country. But as he stood there, with her beside him, he did not feel alone. The war was far from over. In fact, the true war had just begun. Chapter 10 End.